It's estimated that every 60 seconds on the internet, someone will do something that will make headline news for its ignorance and numbskullery. Many of these stories that I have for you today originated on social media sites, and all of them could be considered scandalous. In this compilation video, we're going back in time more than a year to talk about all of the social media scandals that I've ever covered since October 2022. We'll be bouncing between the likes of YouTube, TikTok, Snapchat, Spotify, Soundcloud, OnlyFans, Kick, and many, many more. All of this to unearth the shocking controversies and disastrous behaviour conducted by characters that exude the worst traits that man has to offer. So kick back, relax, maybe drift off to sleep if you want, and let's get right into it. Since its launch over 17 years ago, YouTube has been a staple in our everyday lives. It's become a rich tapestry of human creations, both the highs and the lows, and I know my audience love to linger on the lows. So in this video, we're doing a deep dive into YouTube's most scandalous scandals. We need to do it now while the tea is still warm because these scandals have just been popping up all around us over the past few weeks. So please be sure to follow me on all of my socials, each of which are linked in the description of this video. And with that said, let's get into things. We're going to start out with some more recent breaking stories before we delve into the classics. So what better place to start than Ned Fulmer's cheating scandal? Now here's the thing, I've seen a bit of the Try Guys back in the day and he was my favourite of the four, so I take no pleasure in telling this story. But with that said, if you've somehow been living under a rock and don't know who the Try Guys are, they were perhaps BuzzFeed's most famous employees back in the day, probably their most successful since leaving the site, and their deal was that they would try things out. Even adultery. Even celebrity lingerie. What? Yep, they try things out. From trying to explain RuPaul's Drag Race to straight men, to trying to get diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. Now, each of the four Try Guys had their own things, their own personalities. For example, here's Zach. He's the small one, and he wears glasses. Eugene, he's the cool, introverted one. Keith, he has a big mouth. And he likes eating. And he also wears glasses. And then there was Ned, whose entire thing was that he was a family man that loved his wife. Apparently not enough to not jam his tongue down his employee's throat, though. Said employee was due to be married, and the two of them were caught out in public making out and touching each other. This proved the rumours of many Try Guys fans who had been noticing that Ned had recently been edited out of some of the more recent videos, and he, as well as his wife, have since come out with brief statements, with Ned stating that he lost focus and had a consensual workplace relationship, and Ariel saying that she wished for privacy in this tough time. All of this is, again, such a shock considering that for anyone that watches the Try Guys, they have always seen Ned as a fatherly figure, a committed family man, but this is yet another example that goes to show that we really don't know our favourite online creators, that no matter how much we think we might know about them, we're really just lying to ourselves. With that said, I definitely think they should delete the video where the Try Guys try out bridesmaids dresses for Ned's mistress, because that has really not aged well. Or anything else that's come out of this man's mouth for the past decade for that matter. As of a result of this, the Try Guys have parted ways with Ned, and we're still waiting for a response from the YouTube group. Perhaps by the time this video comes out we'll have some answers, but as of the 29th of September 2022 when I'm writing this, nothing yet has surfaced. For our second and final very recent story, we have one that's been much more hush around online spaces. It's been somewhat swept under the rug, it seems, and a lot of people I know didn't have a clue about this, despite the fact that it came out a few weeks ago now. So we need to talk about Dave from Boy in a Band. He's best known for his song back in 2015, Don't Stay in School, which by the way, that title has not aged well whatsoever. But this song brought up some really interesting and well-made points about the modern school system in a hip rap that captured the attention of tens of millions. From there, he grew his YouTube channel, gaining millions of subscribers and collaborating with only the best and most famous content creators in the world. PewDiePie, iDubbbz, Jaden Animations, The Odd Ones Out, huge names. And I hate to break it to you if you don't know this already, I hate to be the guy to say it because I watched a lot of his content in the past, I really enjoyed it too, but some of the accusations that have been levied against him are very, very serious. He hasn't come out to confirm nor deny these stories. Actually, he's been radio silent on social media for years now, but long story short, a number of women in the double digits apparently who knew him or dated him for various amounts of time, apparently between 1 to 6 years, they have all banded together to disclose some of the abuse that they have received at the hands of the former YouTuber. They've accused him of physically striking one of his exes, of grooming fans, of encouraging eating disorders, which is ironic because he obviously made Jaden Animations' music video about eating disorders. Which I think I need to pause here and say that while I mentioned that he's collaborated with various huge creators in the past, personally I think it's very unlikely that any of them actually knew about this stuff, because I don't think that a person with an eating disorder, for example, would willingly make a music video with someone who would actively encourage them. That's all I wanted to say. Unpause. So that's where we're at now. I don't think that Boy in a Band will ever come back. These accusations, though believed by the public, will likely never get a response from Dave himself. Who knows if any of his online associates will even address it. As of writing this, none of them have, and yet another person who we grew up with thinking he was a good guy has turned out to be a twist villain. With the Try Guys and the Boy of the Band stories out of the way, let's move on to some more classic scandals. So this next one is yet another one that I've spoken about in the past, but I want to once again briefly touch on it because it's definitely one of the biggest scandals that YouTube has ever seen, and that's the promotion of gambling to children, which is bad enough as it is, but it's the promotion of gambling to children to earn fat paychecks. And there are two main examples that I want to talk about, both of them you might have heard of in the past. So the first one dates back to 2016, where huge YouTubers T Martin and Syndicate were found out to have been promoting a CSGO skin gambling site called CSGO Lotto, without disclosing that they actually had skin in the game, being the owner and vice president respectively. Obviously, they were promoting it to try and get money in their pockets. It was extremely shady, to say the least. Years later, yet another duo of money-grubbing mingers decided to try their hand at scamming their child audience, and that was Jake Paul and Rice Gum, who promoted Misery Brand, an online loot box that promised the users all of their most vain and consumeristic wet dreams. If you spent a few quid, you could get designer shoes or AirPods or the latest Apple product, whatever the fuck it was. It was sick in a few ways. Firstly, because these guys once again were paid to promote this website, and they didn't disclose it. But secondly, because the prizes that were being offered were just the most bland, generic luxury items that child NPCs love to own. Both the CSGO Lotto and the Mystery Brand scandals were found out, and all four of these men were lambasted by other creators online. So this one's going to hit a bit closer to home. This was all over the news a few years ago here in the UK, and it surrounds YouTuber Jack Maynard, who was kicked off the British reality competition show I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. Now, I'm not sure how popular this show is overseas, so I'll give you a short rundown of it. The premise of the show is that the producers handpick a few more than a dozen minor celebrities. Most of them are like C tier, but every now and then you'll get someone a bit more famous. And these celebrities will be dropped traditionally in the middle of Australia, and they have to go and compete various challenges in order to get food for their camp. As the weeks go by, they'll one by one be voted off by the general audience until one person is crowned king or queen of the jungle. People such as Gino D'Acampo, Mo Farah, Caitlyn Jenner, and Gemma Collins have competed. But in 2017, it was about to make history when I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here invited their first ever online creator onto the show. It was a good idea in theory. It opened up a new young audience to watch the show for them, and as for the creators, they love nothing more than expanding into mainstream media as we've seen in the past few years. So what was the problem? Well, the problem was that while Jack Maynard said before going into the jungle that he wanted to make the internet proud, his tweets from 5 years prior would cast a cloud of judgment upon online creators. Back in the year 2012, when he was 17 years old, Jack Maynard tweeted out several slurs, and when he was about to go on the show, these resurfaced and it brought up a conversation which has been spoken about many times over the years. These tweets were made when the then 22-year-old was just 17, and they were made in a time before the rise of the social justice movement and woke culture. To what extent can you be criticised or deplatformed for something that you did half a decade ago? These tweets cost him a golden opportunity. It's to my understanding that he left the show after just 3 episodes. Some people thought that the punishment fit the crime, though others were more forgiving of his actions, but what was to be done? Jack Maynard had left the jungle, and that was that. A very interesting scandal to say the least, but definitely not one that painted online creators in a very positive light. With that said, if any I'm a Celebrity producers are watching this video, I'd let it be known that if the paycheck is right, I wouldn't mind going out to Australia and chomping down on a witchetty grub or a kangaroo penis. Just putting my CV out there for the next series. I really couldn't make this video without the OG scandal. Perhaps the most famous of all time, Elsagate. If it's not apparent, I'm not a parent. Not yet, at least. But I think one of parents' biggest fears would be to find out that their children have been consuming horribly inappropriate content. And in 2016 and 2017, those fears would come true. Because it was in those years that it was discovered that there was this hugely disturbed underbelly of YouTube, in which videos that were posing as harmless kids content, including characters such as Elsa, Spider-Man, Mickey Mouse, the Paw Patrol, and the Avengers, were actually home to some overtly violent or sexual content. It's hard to show you guys any footage because the platform has basically culled all of said content over the past 5 years or so. Nor would I even necessarily want to, because there were indeed fears that these channels were desensitizing kids, or worse yet, traumatizing them. These were characters that kids knew and trusted, and they would see them get injured, maimed, kidnapped, abused, tortured, arrested, or more generally be put in these graphic situations. It was awful for the children and the parents alike, because once the child was trapped in this rabbit hole, autoplay was just going to keep them in there. On top of this, apparently predators would often frequent these videos' comment sections, adding yet another chilling layer to the entire ordeal. One of the largest of these channels, Toy Freaks, was owned by a man of the name Greg Chisholm, and after it was deemed that his 2 daughters had allegedly been put in abusive situations, Chisholm was investigated by the police, and though he would not face any criminal charges, his channel would be deleted at the 8.5 million subscribers mark. By the end of 2017, YouTube had put various actions in place to prevent predators from frequenting these videos, potentially being one of the reasons why you can no longer comment on YouTube Kids content in the modern day. Additionally, hundreds of channels were given the axe, and apparently hundreds of thousands of videos deleted. As I said, this would perhaps be YouTube's biggest scandal of all time, but it would not be its last. So this next one wasn't so much of a scandal on YouTube's part, nor was it a scandal on the side of creators, but actually a company whose reputation has been dragged through the mud after accusations of it stealing over $1.7 million from its employees surfaced in January 2019. Of course, I'm talking about Defy Media. So if you haven't heard of this company before, they were originally founded in 1996 under the name Alloy Online. And in 2009, Alloy created a division called Alloy Digital Networks to hold its online properties. This would eventually turn into Defy Media, and the digital network acquired several creators that you might have heard of, the most popular of these being Smosh and Screen Junkies. Now, Defy Media was an MCN, a multi-channel network. If you're unfamiliar with the term, these guys used to be very popular in the early days of YouTube because they were supposed to do a lot more of the businessy parts of creation, such as signing up for brand deals, sorting out copyright issues, and so on and so forth. These responsibilities have since been made essentially obsolete by YouTube's interface and creators understanding the platform more thoroughly. Essentially, in the modern day, and for a while now, these companies have been useless. Ian and Anthony of Smosh sold the company to Defy Media for $0, being promised high amounts of stock in Defy Media when the company went public, which it never did. So Anthony Padilla, the creator of Smosh, was a salaried employee for essentially the entire time of Smosh's existence. Matt Pat of Game Theory made a huge video for his channel, which has since taken in over 8 million views, when he went in on Defy in an emotional and heartfelt speech, saying that himself and 49 other creators got screwed by the company. They were consistently lied to and left out in the dust. It's a video I'd recommend checking out if you're interested in this scandal. These facts I included here were merely the footnotes. But nonetheless, it's very common knowledge at this point the shady dealings of the formerly huge MCNs that infamously took money from creators without giving almost anything back. So this next one I wanted to include because I feel as though when it happened, it went a bit under the radar. And it involves my favourite YouTuber in the world, Jake Paul. You guys already know how much I love this guy. I've bought all of his merch. I'm a Jake Pauler. Guilty as charged. But seriously, what did this guy do? Well, if you're like me, you must have missed this one because it was news to me. But in 2019, he apparently threw a drug-filled birthday party for the American rapper Designer, in which he invited minors. And no, I don't mean the blue-collar miners that spend their days underground. Jakey over here would never associate with that scum. He would associate with teenage girls when he's way into his 20s though, because it was reported that 9 teenage girls were drugged at his party, signing a disclaimer upon entry. This was leaked by a parent of one of the girls who blasted it on Facebook the next day. Now, believe it or not, I've been to a party or two in my time, and I've met a lot of people who got seriously drunk and woke up the next day thinking that someone put something in their drink, when in actuality, they'd just taken 5 shots in a minute, blacked out, forgot about it, and threw up all over themselves. But, based on just how many teenage girls reported getting spiked, I think it's more fair to say that something iffy was afoot here. On top of that, based on the pictures of this house party, there would have been a ton of people there. Everyone apart from me, apparently. My invite must have been lost in the post or something. But the Facebook statement itself is seriously worrying. This wasn't someone posting it to mainstream media, it was posted to a Facebook group with all of the mums of the local area within it. And according to a report from The Independent, an official complaint was made by a female guest, who also suspects that she was drugged at the party. Very suspicious, but not something I've ever heard before, and since I am Jake Paul's #1 fan, I thought that it was strange. This guy's been in hot water before, but I thought I had heard all of his controversies. Apparently not. With recent events on Twitch, it looks like this wouldn't be the last controversial party that online creators would host, but it was surely one of the first. So we're heading back to the mid-2010s to talk about this next story, one that might unlock a small memory within your head. It's the story of Samurai Buyer. So if you don't remember this, or need help recalling events, a few years ago, in like 2015, 2016 time, there was an unknown businessman known as Misaki, who some YouTubers such as I Hate Everything and iDubbbz and Jaden Animations were approached by. He was representing a company called Samurai Buyer, who were selling authentic Japanese loot boxes to people. So this supposed Japanese man with broken English would send over a box of authentically Japanese goodies to creators who would then review them on video, noting within these videos how funny it was to talk to this guy. A lot of the time these creators would think that they were having a laugh at the expense of Misaki, but in reality, it had all been masterminded, and Misaki would get the last laugh. For you see, the quality of the items featured in these YouTubers' videos fluctuated, and there were countless fans who ordered their boxes and claimed that the items within them were damaged or outright broken, if they even came at all or without unexpected charges. And all around, many people thought that this thing was all a giant scam. Additionally, it's been theorized that many of these quirky conversations that he had with creators had been put on, because not only would he change his writing style depending on who he was speaking to, playing it up more edgy for edgy creators and more cutie for tame creators, but having listened to him speak on Skype, he has a much better understanding of English than his emails would have led on. It's therefore thought that the guy behind the emails was a character, a marketing technique to get these creators to plug his work. And then there were the horrible working conditions claimed by someone that was said to have been hired by Masaki, a guy known online as Merriweather, who quit his job to go work for Masaki after iDubbbz had advertised a position as a social media marketing manager for Masaki's company, Samurai Buyer. It was his dream job, so he quit his job in Scandinavia to go to Japan, but after working for Samurai Buyer for about a year or so, he was fired without any warning. He apparently received extreme ridicule and insults from Masaki and was barely able to get back home. Since then, Merriweather has come out with his experience. And though Samurai Buyer was shut down in 2020, it's hard to not forget the time that this seemingly innocent Japanese man Masaki, with hilarious and wacky broken English, took the whole internet for a ride, one creator at a time. If you want a more thorough explanation of events, The Right Opinion has an hour-long video describing it in much more detail, which I leaned on in research for this portion of my own video. I'd recommend checking that video out because it's great. This is Austin McBroom, and this was his influencer boxing event, Social Gloves Battle of the Platforms, which pitted 6 YouTubers against 6 TikTokers and proved once and for all, almost unanimously, that YouTube content creators were the dominant alphas when it came to physicality, thus proving a fact that we knew all along, that YouTubers are clearly superior. All would have gone well for McBroom that night. Not only did he win his fight, but his side won overall. But, and this is a huge but, the event lost a ton of money. McBroom had anticipated that it would make hundreds of millions, but after only selling 136,000 subscriptions at between $50 and $90, you can see that even with the most generous estimations, if every one of those subscriptions were bought at the top tier package, which they were not, McBroom would have been way under his estimation of 10 million subscriptions. So some people would have to take a pay cut, and by that I mean they weren't paid at all. Various TikTokers stepped into the ring that night, got their ass clapped by their YouTube counterparts, and got paid squat for it. Creators Nate Wyatt and Taylor Holder reportedly sent out lawsuits against this guy. NBA star James Harden sent out legal papers to him as well, and LiveXLive are trying to get him for $100 million. Other creators that fought, such as Deji and Anise and Gibb, were thought to have been paid in advance. Likely seeing this as the farce that it was, they wanted their money up front. Were people just not interested in who would win out of YouTubes versus TikTokers? Were the headlines just not drawing in the big bucks? Was there not enough promotion for the event? Or could it have been a mixture of all of these things? It probably was. Logan Paul has since come out and called many of the business decisions made, quote, fucking stupid, and it's all gone down in infamy for perhaps being the worst YouTube boxing event of all time. Definitely, if there was ever a YouTube-related scandal to be included in this video, this one would absolutely have to be there, so it is. Hot take, guys. I think we need to bring back shame. Some people are posting some absolutely shameless content online and not thinking twice about it, and some of that content might be considered scandalous. And so in this video, we're doing a deep dive into TikTok's most shameful scandals. And let me tell you right now, it gets crazy. So please make sure to follow me on all of my socials. And with that said, let's get into the video. So first things first, I don't use TikTok for basically any reason, so my opinions today are going to be as unbiased as they potentially could be. I don't really have much skin in the game. At least it's going to be as unbiased as it could be based off my research. Having said that, the first story we have today is Nessa Barrett dancing to the Quran. So this scandal is centered around Nessa Barrett, who in April 2020 decided to make a TikTok of her dancing to the sound of what she thought was a man singing after finding this song on her For You page, at least according to her record of events. She and a friend were scrolling on TikTok trying to brainstorm ideas when she came across the song, which, if I can interject, what does brainstorming ideas for TikTok mean? Today, am I going to dance to a song or lip sync to a song? So many possibilities. But back on topic, she didn't know it yet, but she was about to throw it back to someone reciting the Quran. People saw the video and many of them got upset. They found this to be very disrespectful and left various messages voicing their distaste for the video, and so Nessa Barrett took it down. And that would have been it, if not for another grave mistake. And by that I mean, she live streamed her apology, which has since gone down in history as yet another horribly botched apology. because people took note of something particular that she said, which was that because her stepmother and step-siblings are of Egyptian blood, that gave her the pass, which to many people had the same energy as the classic "I have black friends" type deal. So trying to lean on her stepmom's heritage really didn't work out the way that she would have wanted it to. On top of this, she's quoted as saying, "I think I'm sorry," in what can only be classed as one of the more strange apologies I've seen. She seemed quite disinterested in honesty, but I guess it worked out for her in the end, because she's since gone from 6.5 million followers to 19.5, so she's remained incredibly popular. So that was just one story of many I have for you today, so let's move on to get to the rest. Speaking of Egypt, we need to talk about a scandal where Egyptian women a few years ago were arrested for debauchery, and this could arguably be the biggest scandal of all on the scroll, at least on a personal level. What's even more scary is that I haven't heard shit about it, despite it being a horrible attack on individual liberty and women's rights. If you don't know what debauchery is, it's defined on Google as excessive indulgence in sex, alcohol, or drugs, which in this case was referring to famous Egyptian TikTok creators Haneen Hassam and Mawada al-Adam's indulgence in promoting sexual content, which was an arrestable offence because apparently it was attacking society's values. So this was less a scandal on the part of creator or even TikTok as a platform, but actually the Egyptian justice system in relation to creators on TikTok, specifically female creators. It was reported that Haneen Hassam had been arrested in April 2020 after posting a video on TikTok, telling her 1.3 million followers that girls should go onto a different app, Likey, where they could make live videos and make some serious money. These women were initially accused of inciting debauchery and attacking public morals. And you probably aren't going to like how this all turned out. Because while I read on The Guardian that they were acquitted for their crimes in January 2021, the prosecutors then played a more serious card and accused them of human trafficking, which led them to once again have to stand up in front of the court, and this time they would not walk away free. With both Hassam and al-Haddam being sentenced to 2 years in prison and being fined the equivalent of roughly $16,000 or £12,500. Human rights activists claim that this comes as a recent crackdown on female social media influencers. They argue that the charges that Hassam and at least 11 other women with millions of followers have faced since 2020 violate the rights to privacy, freedom of expression, non-discrimination, and bodily autonomy. So while there might have been a sharp outcry to what was going on here, it wouldn't matter anyway because the women are firmly behind bars now. This is the kind of thing you don't really hear on the news, but at least in my opinion, this is something I would consider absolutely scandalous, and I wanted to bring some attention towards it. This is a bit strange, but Bella Poarch might go down as having the worst tattoo on the internet, because our next story surrounds this tat, which, if you're unaware of it, if you've never seen it before, this tattoo is of the Japanese rising sun with a heart in the middle of it. Yeah, very dicey. I have no clue why she chose this tattoo, especially because she's a Filipino American, which, if you've watched my Filipino Urban Legends video, you would know just a few of the atrocities that the Japanese Imperial Army marching under that flag would commit there. If you somehow don't know what the Japanese rising sun symbol is, back in World War II, Japan did not have the flag that we see them use today with the simple red dot on a white background. Instead, they would march under this flag, the rising sun, and as I said, they committed some of the worst atrocities ever seen in war. Seriously, a portion of their soldiers were next level evil, and many people do not like seeing this flag whatsoever, especially those who reside in countries that were under Japanese rule during the war years. Many people, in fact, put this symbol in the same camp as yet another famous World War II flag from the Axis, which has since needed to be changed. So, history lesson over, but this is one that Bella should have had before inking up her arm. Of course, there is the possibility that it was never intended to offend anyone. Poarch has since come out and said, and I quote, "I will have this tattoo removed or covered up. I did not know the history behind this tattoo and I will educate others about it." Which, to be honest, I believe. I don't think that anyone would risk the backlash that a tattoo like that would give them. It could have just been that she liked the design and didn't know the history, but then you'd also have to ask, what was she doing during history class? Because everyone studies World War II, and the Japanese Imperial Army was a very important part of that conflict. She's never come out and said what the tattoo meant to her, but considering that she said she was going to get it covered or removed, I guess it probably doesn't matter much anymore. Oh man, this one is just the wildest, and if you haven't heard of it before, I'm sure this is going to outrage you. 100% a shameful scandal. The headline of our next story is Zoe Laverne kisses a 13-year-old fan. No, this isn't a typo. No, I didn't misspeak. If you're not familiar with Zoe Laverne, she is an insanely popular TikToker with over 20 million followers. But before that, she was very popular on TikTok's unofficial predecessor, Musical.ly. Take things back a few years though, and in November 2020, her online career was almost ended when in a leaked video, it surfaced that the then 19-year-old was caught kissing a 13-year-old fan. Insider would report on this incident a year later, where they wrote, "In an apology, Laverne said she caught feelings for the young fan, who goes by Connor Joyce online. Laverne blamed the interaction on the pair becoming best friends and denied that she'd been grooming Connor, a term used when an older person builds a close relationship to manipulate and exploit a younger person. For teenage influencers clinging on to fast-paced online fame, controversy can be a good thing. TikTok stars like Bryce Hall and Danielle Cohen have cultivated profitable personas as troublemakers and provocateurs, and even family-friendly influencers like Charli D'Amelio and Addison Rae are boosted by relationship drama. But there's a tipping point for influencer scandals, especially those involved in inappropriate relationships with underage fans." And I think I need to address the elephant in the room here and ask why Zoe Laverne was allowed to carry on despite the grooming allegations, and it wasn't because she was a great dancer or content creator. It was because she was a woman. Because if it was leaked that a 19-year-old guy was out there kissing his 13-year-old fans, his career would be over quicker than the guys in Spy Kids 3. And I'm sorry, but saying that they were best friends is particularly incriminating, because a 19-year-old and a 13-year-old have nothing in common whatsoever. What do they even talk about? Obviously, Laverne faced backlash, but a few years on now and she's weathered the storm, with this merely being a dent in her reputation. She would become a mother in 2021 and came under fire yet again for selling baby pictures later that year, but that was more of a bit of drama than an actual scandal. The Connor Joyce situation though, definitely a scandal in my books. So next up we have the CNMA scandal. Buckle up people, because as someone who's as inactive in the TikTok scene as I am, even I knew about this one, mainly down to the apology video, but still a lot of people know that this happened. So if you haven't heard it to death already, I'm going to tell the story and give my 2 cents. So let's have a little recap on things. So Jack Wright and CNMA were, and still are, incredibly popular TikTokers. And starting in October 2020, they appeared together in a number of their online posts. So much, in fact, that their fans started theorizing that the two of them might have been entering into a relationship with each other. They were coming up together, but not for long. Because after a while, people started to notice that the two's collaboration frequency suddenly took a sharp decline. Initially, people thought it was because the Hype House was shooting a Netflix show which the two were both set to star in. But soon, a curveball would be thrown into the situation when Jack Wright's friend Mason Rizzo dropped a bombshell on Twitter accusing CNMA of sexually assaulting Jack. Wright's brother James would retweet the accusation, which Sienna immediately denied. And before long, Mason would take down the tweet saying that the ordeal would be dealt with offline. Sienna would lose hundreds of thousands of followers, and she would soon respond to the allegations saying that while she was in love with Jack, the feelings were not mutual. But she did not assault him, and her passion for the boy was just misconstrued for desperation. Things would soon take yet another sharp left turn though, when an apparent witness of the event, Lachlan Hanneman, would come forward a few days later and post a video on TikTok as it showed a seemingly extremely inebriated Jack Wright passed out on the couch as CNMA straddled him, making out with him, and reaching for his privates. Lachlan said that quickly after recording the video, he separated the two of them. In response to this, CNMA would send out cease and desist letters, and would once again defend herself, saying that Jack was not passed out in the video, but was in fact awake, saying, the way that Jack's friend narrated this video, I'll admit, looks so weird. If he was unconscious, why did his arm move when you got up? And also, why was he kissing me back? The entire scandal would have serious impact on the aforementioned Netflix show, and the two of them were essentially omitted from it. A few months later, in January of this year, Jack Wright finally broke his silence and came out with a 17.5-minute video titled What Sienna May Did to Me, which has since garnered over 20 million views with overwhelming support from his audience. In the video, Wright claimed that what Hanneman had said was true, that he was indeed unconscious, and that what Sienna May did to him was unconsented. The main takeaway of the comments of this video being that sexual assault can happen to anyone regardless of gender. Sienna May's legal representatives would reaffirm May's stance that she did none such thing, and the entire series of events were in an attempt to slander and defame her character and reputation. And this isn't even to mention the apology video that she did, in which she performed an interpretive dance to reflect her feelings on the situation. This interpretive dance has since been deemed potentially the worst apology video of all time. It would be like if, after the allegations against Call Me Carson came out, he would drop a video doing the Macarena. It seemed horribly insensitive to Jack Wright. If you want my 2 cents on the situation, someone who is far, far removed from this creator sphere, her dropping that video, to me, is proof that she did it, because no sane person would do what she was accused of and then come out with an interpretive dance to, I guess, apologize. It leads me to believe that she is guilty. Since then, both of their careers have carried on. Again, you might want to point to double standards here, because while her character has essentially been destroyed by the allegations that are widely believed, she still frequently posts to TikTok and still gets hundreds of thousands, if not millions of views per video. And if it were the other way around, just like the Zoe Laverne scandal, immediately the guy would be perma-cancelled. As it goes though, this might be the highest profile controversy TikTok has ever seen, and it's likely the highest profile scandal in this video. Oh, I hope you guys are ready for our next scandal, because if you go down onto your TikTok right now and you carry on scrolling, the content is going to change. But no matter what, whether you go down 5, 10, 15, I could probably make a bet with you right now that 2 things would stay the same, and that's that every single person that you're watching is attractive and rich. Because according to a report published by Sam Biddle, Paulo Victor Ribeiro, and Tatiana Diaz of The Intercept, they discovered that people deemed too poor, ugly, or disabled for the app actually got their content suppressed. That's right, we have online eugenics going on at our very fingertips. This is the real reason I don't have a TikTok account, because it wouldn't take 5 minutes for this ugly mug to get censored. Now, in response to this, TikTok has claimed that it's not trying to intentionally suppress the disabled, poor, or uggos, it just wants to try and make sure that they're not the victim of bullying or harassment. So they tend to keep them off the For You page compared to other creators that are more rich or attractive. According to the Intercept report, videos showing rural poverty, slums, beer bellies, and crooked smiles have all been suppressed among videos showcasing other undesirable traits. I mean, let's be fair here too though, many people on TikTok are only popular because they're attractive or rich in the first place. So even if clap people were to make TikToks of themselves dancing, they probably wouldn't get very far because people are just going to watch the more attractive person do the exact same thing. This report, however, if accurate, should be a cause for concern, because while the wealthy and attractive have always been at the forefront of media, to algorithmically eliminate the chances of less well-looking or poorer or disabled people being seen, I mean, that's kind of scary, right? I personally want to see some more clapped representation out there. Let's see what the guys with the beer bellies have to say. Or let's give the guy with the lazy eye a break for once, you know? Now, this news does relate quite extensively to a scandal that we're going to talk about later on, so keep this in the back of your mind for later. With that said, that's all I have to say for this one, so let's move on to the next story. Of course, of everyone I'm going to discuss today, I don't think a single one of them is nearly as infamous as the bidet. You see, I remember when TikTok had its first big burst of attention all of those years ago. It was absolutely the why do good girls like bad guys trend, and I remember seeing this dude, the bidet, on all of the cringy TikTok compilations doing duets, which is what first drew my eye to the platform. Albeit a guy that does not use TikTok at all, he was the first TikTok celebrity. He was the first figure I personally recognized on the app. But if you look him up online, he's no longer seen as this hilariously nerdy dude that duets people's TikToks. You'll see that he's actually been accused all over the shop of being a predator. The story is that riding off the coattails of why do good girls like bad guys, people started to notice him on TikTok. He eventually gained a fairly sized following and immediately traded it all in to try and speak to underage girls. You give some people an inch, they will take a mile. This is what happened to the Buddet, or at least as per the rumours go. To continue the story, he used his newfound social media presence to DM underage girls, apparently attempting to solicit nudes. But can I ask something for a moment? Was anyone actually surprised? Like, I don't want to judge a book by its cover, but this dude kind of just looks like the type, you know? Just putting it out there. When he's duetting with the girls half of his age doing this shit, you can only question. Apparently the police spoke to him about his activities, but to my knowledge he was never arrested, though his TikTok account did get banned. And then, according to a Reddit post that I found during research for my banned Twitch video, I found out that he actually changed his username and then went online by the name Freak Alpha, streaming on Twitch for a while and also trying numerous other times to get a TikTok account, even though he had already been banned. But unfortunately for him, TikTok got him every time he wanted to set up a new account. And now, a few years on from him being exposed, he essentially has gone dark on the internet, remaining a dark mark on the early days of TikTok. The fact of the matter is, when your first recognizable creator gets found out to be a predator, that's something I would call a shameful scandal. I think I'm going to dub this next scandal Stupid Challenges, because over the course of TikTok's existence, there have been a number of challenges that have come out that were either outright dangerous to its participants or otherwise ill thought out, insensitive, ticking time bombs. And I'm not saying that this doesn't happen elsewhere on the internet. I think that the clearest examples of this are the Salt and Ice Challenge that happened a couple of years ago that gave people burns on their skin. And at least the one that I'm most familiar with was on YouTube, and it was Alfie Day's Living Off £1 for a Day challenge, which was deemed as horribly insensitive and led to his infamous I'm Not a Tory video, which was equal parts hilarious, but also unfortunate because it seemed clear that the guy was just a bit out of touch, but not malicious or anything. In terms of TikTok challenges though, where do we even begin? Let's see. We have DIY vampire fangs, in which people would superglue vampire fangs onto their teeth and then wouldn't be able to get them off. We also have the face wax challenge, in which people would cake their face with some sort of green wax for like beauty content. Like, what the hell even is this? Who thought this would be a good idea? Anyways, we have the corn on the cob challenge, perhaps the most infamous of all of these, just because of the horrendous backfires that it produced. Then we have the cereal challenge, which is just where you make cereal in your mouth, and it goes without saying that this is a choking hazard waiting to happen. The skull breaker challenge? Do I need to even say more? We also have the frozen honey challenge, the milk crate challenge, and the penny challenge, just to name a few more. People have died, man. People have died. Or seriously gotten injured doing stupid TikTok trends. And on the one hand, you might want to say, oh, Darwin Award. Like, if you're doing the skull breaker challenge, that only comes along with accepting the possibility that you might break your skull. But on the other hand, most people doing these challenges are children, teens, and young adults that apparently don't know any better. I read online that the CDC estimated that 80 people have died due to the blackout challenge. Like, guys, if the possibility is death, do not do these challenges. I can't believe I have to say this, but the fact that a number of young people are dying due to these dumb challenges is something that I just have to include in this video. It's scandalous that these trends can even exist in my books. Data collection allegations. I'm sure that anyone that uses TikTok might be aware of this one. It's all over the news. It's pretty mainstream knowledge. Now, whether this is true or false is still yet to be seen. It's thus far merely an allegation. There's been article after article describing how it might be taking your data and selling it to China in some sort of elaborate plan. Of course, we know that the social media app is owned by a company based in China, and with TikTok as large and as powerful as it is, cause for concern would be par for the course. Now, every social media company collects data. That's what cookies are. It's why you're always asked if your cookies can be tracked. But TikTok in particular has been accused of harvesting information from in-app messaging and even tracking the locations of its users. On top of this, compared to the average app, it's been accused of having way more permissions active when the user is on it, and if the user turns any of its permissions off, it is much more persistent to have them turned back on than any other social media app. This isn't what anyone hasn't heard before, but what you might not have heard before relates to our next story, and that's the claim that the app can be proven to be connected to the Chinese government because it suspiciously censors the same content that the Chinese government would also censor. There is evidence that TikTok downweights posts of political dissidents, LGBT people, disabled people as we discussed earlier, and certain African American hashtags. It needs to be said that this might not be the app's choice though, it might be mandatory, because in January 2019 it came out that the Chinese government were going to hold social media apps accountable for the actions of their user base, one of those social media apps being TikTok. For this reason, topics and events that the government would want to sweep under the rug, such as the Hong Kong protests, Tibetan independence, the Xinjiang internment camps, or even the Uyghur genocide, have all been censored on the platform. This would come into the mainstream when in 2019, Feroza Aziz would post a video disguised as a makeup tutorial, but within the video, she actually spoke about the Xinjiang internment camps. When this reached TikTok, they would have her account suspended. But later they would go back on their decision, stating that the initial suspension was due to a human error. The next year, The Times India claimed that TikTok was censoring content related to the Chinese-Indian border dispute. And straying east from China, earlier this year it was discovered that while Russian content was banned in the West, Western content has actually been removed from Russian TikTok. And this should be seriously worrying, because if it happens in Russia, who's to say that this isn't happening elsewhere? The software project that unveiled this information, named Tracking Exposed, has come out to say that this could potentially be especially dangerous and cause what they've coined a splinternet, because it means that important international news sources could be getting cut off from people living within authoritarian regimes. It concluded that TikTok has become a propaganda tool for the Kremlin and has cut off avenues of dissent. What does it mean for the future of free access to information? It's too early to say. However, if the accusations are true, if TikTok is censoring information and content that these governments would deem inappropriate, it's something that we should all be very worried by. You've been to a convention, right? Whether it be Comic-Con, TanaCon, or the 17th annual Banana Convention, most people have been to a convention. And as we all know, fan conventions can fluctuate in quality, because whether it be Comic-Con, TanaCon, or the 17th annual Banana Convention, each of them are going to have different levels of cringiness, they're going to have different event managers, venues, different locations and whatnot. So in this video, I'm going to talk to you about the worst of the worst. I have several stories here, each of them describing a convention that could be labelled as catastrophic. And let me tell you, that word could be used to describe conventions a lot more often than you might think. So if you haven't already, be sure to follow me on all of my socials. And with that said, let's begin. So we have to start out with one that I've already spoken about on this channel once or twice already. Of course, it has to be TanaCon. If we flash back to 2017, Tana Mongeau was not invited to VidCon, YouTube's leading fan convention, as a featured creator, despite being one of the larger ones on the platform. In response to this, she decided that the next year she would host her own event, TanaCon. Some huge names were set to be at TanaCon that year instead of TwitchCon. Bella Thorne, Shane Dawson, Casey Neistat, Gabby Hanna, and obviously Tana Mongeau herself. Surely with all of these big names, nothing could go wrong, right? Wrong. Here's the thing. Even though large names were attached, that was probably the best planned element of the convention, because aside from that, it was horribly mismanaged. The venue of the event, the Marriott, soon realised that it would not be able to support the amount of people that were coming. Tana Mongeau reported that 20,000 people tried to attend that day, but police reports actually stated that the number was much closer to about 4,000 to 5,000, a far cry from her reported number. Thousands would wait outside in the blistering summer heat for Tana, dehydrated, sunburnt, some even passed out. The line to get in was a slow, painful crawl to the entrance, and it was soon apparent that many who bought their tickets would never be allowed in. Attendants began revolting, some even calling for a refund. The cat was out of the bag, and was immediately put into the word catastrophic. The entire event would go on to be compared to the Fire Festival fiasco, and it would soon be shut down. Now, Tana Mongeau claimed that the fire marshal shut it down, with them saying that it would be a safety hazard. But once again, the local police weighed into reporters to say that this claim was once again false. There was no report that the fire marshal had put an end to it. I've never had an experience like this. I've never been crushed up against a fence with my legs pressed between two tables. I've never stood in the sun for 5+ hours straight. I'm up in my hotel room just baffled. But I got this great pic when everyone shoved at once. #TanaCon. Now, you might be expecting me to go in quite hard on Tana. I'm sure I have in previous videos, because again, this is not the first time I've mentioned TanaCon. But one thing that I might have overlooked in previous tellings of this story is that Tana Mongeau is 24 now, meaning that back then she would have actually been about 18 or 19. And I'm not saying that this excuses anything, I'm not saying that this excuses people passing out outside or being dehydrated or getting sunburnt, but it is a bit more understandable that this was a genuine mistake. I can sympathise that she was young and she probably didn't really know what she was doing, she just didn't like VidCon so she wanted to make one of her own. But the bottom line was that she really didn't know what she was doing. And I know there were multiple instances where she said herself that she was contributing greatly to this effort, and it's clear to see that obviously she was 18 or 19 at the time, event management probably wasn't her forte, she shouldn't have put herself in the position to begin with. It was ill thought out nonetheless and a bad blunder. But fortunately, everyone that got a ticket was apparently refunded. So apart from wasting a day of their life and a few people getting sunburnt, it wasn't the worst convention of all time, even if it is one of the most infamous. To get to those worst conventions though, we're gonna have to move on so I can tell you their stories. I'm sure you might be a bit surprised that I didn't talk about this for the first story, but of course we're going to talk about it now. We have to discuss the disaster that was TwitchCon 2022. But since I did my video on Twitch about a month or so ago, the platform has really gone through the ringer. So much has gone down. But the gladiator platforms at TwitchCon 2022 would make headline news when streamer and adult film star Adriana Chechik was dueling someone on these gladiator platform things, won her battle, and decided to star jump into the foam pit below in a leap of victory. The only thing was that the foam pit was nowhere near deep enough. It didn't have enough padding, and so essentially she landed right on her ass from a few feet up, breaking her back in 2 places. These news sources that I mentioned earlier would somewhat make fun of the situation in their headlines, saying that she had her back blown out. But in reality, this was a serious situation, because these sorts of back injuries are usually stuck with you for life. Though this back injury alone wasn't the only reason one could dub TwitchCon 2022 as catastrophic. You need only ask the staff that were working the event what they thought of it, and you would be led to believe that there were indeed some other problems. A video was released to the internet about a week or two ago now, when someone had a brief interview with a woman working security at the event. And she described the attendees as frequently not following the rules, she called them entitled, she said that they were verbally abusive, and it doesn't stop there, because there were also attendees not understanding how trains worked and walking out in front of them, and then worst of all, there was this guy who got a streamer to step on him. Like, this one isn't too bad, but it just angers me, man. And this isn't even to mention the many people who stalk Dream and other prominent Minecrafters, a specific person who tried to stalk Amaranth months after he was arrested for stalking Amaranth. There was also the fact that Twitch somehow found at least $200,000 worth of money to book Megan Thee Stallion for a performance, despite the fact that they just decreased every Twitch streamer's revenue split to 50-50, down from higher percentages months ago for the biggest streamers. But it doesn't end there. Twitch streamer Zummers broke her foot during the Balloon World Cup event, and another Twitch streamer both dislocated her knee and sprained her ankle on the very same gladiator activity that messed up Adriana Chechik. So yeah, the most recent TwitchCon came and went, leaving a sour taste in the mouths of many, with some even describing the event as catastrophic. So moving on to perhaps some catastrophic conventions that you might not have heard of, we need to talk about San Diego Comic-Con 2014. And if we think back to 2014 for a moment, some of the younger viewers of this video might not be able to remember it so much, but there was an absolute zombie craze in the early to mid 2010s. At that point in time, zombie content ruled the world. The Last of Us, The Train to Busan, but especially The Walking Dead were gigantic cultural phenomenons, and for that reason, zombies were huge. So much so that Comic-Con a few years ago thought it would be fun to do something called a zombie walk, where people who wanted to participate would dress up as a zombie and slowly strut down the street. By 2014, it had been going on for 8 years. This was the 8th annual zombie walk, but it would almost be the last, as a man of the name Matthew Poche made his appearance on the scene, sat inside his car with his girlfriend, mother, and 9-year-old son. According to Poche, he got waved through by people on the street and was now stuck in the middle of the zombie walk. The hearing impaired man claimed to have soon been spooked though, by people who he said jumped out in front of his car. He allegedly proceeded to loudly and aggressively honk his horn before flooring it, driving through the parade, injuring many, and driving over one woman's arm, breaking it. It was almost left in need of amputation. The 47-year-old was found guilty of reckless driving resulting in great bodily injury, and was subsequently put on probation for 3 years, also being tasked to complete 60 days of home detention with an electric monitor. The zombie walk would return 2 years later at Comic-Con 2016 after being noticeably absent from 2015, but Comic-Con 2014 zombie walk will be remembered evermore for all of the wrong reasons. So this next story is going to take things up a level. Have you ever played the Pokemon card game? I don't know how popular it is these days, but when I was a kid, these boys and match attacks were at their peak of popularity. I even have a Totodile from the McDonald's promotion framed right here. But anyways, our next story is about competitive Pokemon card players, because in 2015 it was time for the Pokemon Card World Championships, an event that was traditionally a family affair. But this year it would almost turn into a deadly affair, because this was when a duo of men, 18-year-old Kevin Norton and 27-year-old James Stumbo, decided that they would perhaps play their fire-type Pokemon while packing heat. Yeah. These men were about to bring their guns to a Pokemon card event, and you know what they say, don't bring a gun to a Pokemon fight. As you can guess, this was not well received by the security staff, especially as prior to the Pokemon World Championships, Stumbo, decided to post a picture of the pair's car with a shotgun and an AR-15 fit snugly into the boot. But also, if I can interject, in what world do an 18 and a 27-year-old chip in for a car together? What is the story behind that? The deal was, however, that neither of these men would ever play a single move at the event, if they were even planning to from the beginning. As before the event, police were able to apprehend them, finding 2 unregistered guns in their car, as well as mounds of bullets and even hunting knives. So what happened to them? Well, you don't need to be a psychic to guess that they got in trouble for these dark deeds. And despite fighting for their freedom, the pair were rocked and grounded when they found out that they were sentenced to 2 years behind bars, dragging a steel ball around their leg in a cell with limited electricity and water, forced only to look out through a small window to see bugs in the grass below and birds flying high above, slowly becoming ghosts of their former normal selves in a poisonous and fiery affair. I see it as fair punishment, honestly, and I think that the police did a good job being able to apprehend them before anything troublesome could occur. So before we move on to our next story, there's something that I want to ask you guys, especially the people that are frequent viewers of this channel, and that's that I've never really gone to a proper convention, at least not a big one. So my question to you is that if I were to hypothetically go to one in the next year or so, where would you want me to go? Obviously, I'm based in the UK, but I'm not against hopping on a plane and going overseas. So if there are any conventions that you'd like to see me, if there's any that you think I might be a good match for, let me know in the comments below. And with that said, let's resume. Back when I announced that this video was going to be made, I had overlooked the amount of people that wanted me to talk about this next topic, that of course being of DashCon. Well, ask and you shall receive, because this is its tale. And ladies and gentlemen, if there was to ever be a convention labelled catastrophic, it would be this one. This was perhaps one of the worst managed events ever held, with a video published by the internet historian describing it in great detail and raking in over 15 million views since its release. But the long and short of this story was that a few years back now, people noticed that Tumblr did not have a convention, so they would try to make one. Originally named TumbleCon USA, the creators of this event didn't know it yet, but they had unleashed perhaps the largest Pandora's box in the history of conventions, because it would go on to become infamous for allegations of mismanagement and corruption. There was also allegedly an abrupt demand by the hotel for an upfront payment of cash for use of its facilities. And to add to the infamy, some celebrity guests were forced to drop out of the convention after they were informed by the hotel that they would be responsible for paying for their rooms. And finally, there was a cherry on top of the infamy cake that was so laughable, I don't know if you would have ever heard anything so ridiculous. What you need to know about this convention was that just like TanaCon, it never actually kicked into gear despite many people making the journey to it. Roughly 300 in total, which was lower than what the organisers had originally estimated. But nonetheless, once these attendees had arrived, they were met by organisers panhandling, saying that they'd have to chip their money in to keep the convention from shutting down. You know, despite the fact that each person that attended would have had to spend a fair amount of money to even get through the door. In the end, the organisers did not meet their intended monetary goal, and so it was shut down. And instead of being financially reimbursed, each person that attended was reimbursed via tickets to a raffle, a concert, and the final consolation prize that I mentioned earlier, the cherry on top of the infamy cake. A bull pit. Alongside tickets to a raffle and tickets to a small band that were playing in the local area, management gave convention goers an extra hour in the bull pit that looks like it's placed straight out of the back rooms instead of giving their money back. This instantly became a meme. But to be fair, if you're going to a Tumblr convention, I'm not going to say that you were asking for it, but I will say that you getting shafted restored balance to the universe. It healed your big sin. It leveled things out. I read online that it was also claimed that a child peed in the bull pit, but these rumours are unconfirmed. Now, that would have all sucked hard, but if you thought that was a catastrophic convention, wait until you've heard our next story. Despite how financially catastrophic many of these have been, the next convention that we're set to talk about was perhaps the most physically catastrophic. Somehow even more so than the 2014 Comic-Con incident that we talked about earlier, where the woman got her arm broken. This next one happened in the same year though, 2014, and the convention was called Midwest Fur Fest. Which, can I just say, 2014 was not a good year for conventions. The Zombie Walk, Minorama, and now this. But nonetheless, Midwest Fur Fest 2014 would go down in infamy because 19 people who attended the event would soon have to be rushed to hospital. You see, furries aren't exactly the most beloved group of people in the world. I know that throughout my time on this channel, I've definitely ripped into them a fair amount of times. They're low-hanging fruit, they're easy to take the mick out of. But having said that, it's hard to defend violence being brought to them, because these ones at least were just minding their own business. They had spent money and bought tickets, they were expecting to have a good time at this convention, but tragedy would befall them when a gas leak happened at the Hyatt Hotel in which many people attending were staying. The hotel was soon evacuated, but as I said earlier, 19 people there were hospitalized. Fortunately, however, of these 19 people, 18 were soon swiftly released from hospital. The police would investigate the hotel when they found a concentration of chlorine powder inside the building, leading them to believe that this was no mere accident, but instead it was a planned and controlled attack. The police would go on to speak to employees at the hotel, attendees at the convention, and local store owners whose shops sell chlorine. But years later, they have not cracked the case. The event would go on to continue after the attack, but naturally, this incident was the elephant in the room the entire weekend, and it would largely overshadow the event. And it now goes down in history as yet another catastrophic convention. So if you know all there is to know about catastrophic conventions, then you might shudder when I utter the words Minorama. If you don't know what this convention was, buckle in, because I could say this might be the most catastrophic convention of all time. And I can confidently say that because not only did it never actually happen, but many people now think it was never going to happen. From the start, this was always a scam. So if we take things back to just over a decade ago, back to 2011, that was the year that Minecon began, and it was an instant success. Minecraft was huge, so thousands of people travelled to attend its convention, and over the next few years it would go on to be primarily known for cringe, but also for being one of the world's largest events. And if you want to doubt me on that, back in 2013, the first batch of 2,500 tickets to the event was sold out in 3 seconds. You heard that right. 3 seconds. That is insane. However, for as popular as the event was in 2013, if you were to look up Minecon Cringe Compilation 2014 on YouTube, you will see that no such thing exists. The 2013 Cringe Compilation is there, as is the 2015 edition, but the 2014 is strangely absent, despite the game still being incredibly popular back then, and that's because it never happened. It was rescheduled to take place in London in 2015, and so with such a gaping gap, there was a block-shaped hole to fill. And filled it would soon be by Minorama, a new event having its very first year. Huge names in the Minecraft scene such as Sky Does Minecraft, Deadlocks and Husky Mudkips were set to attend, and roughly $500,000 was spent by fans all around the world to try and get tickets. But as you know, there was a twist in the tale somewhere, and this was because a mere 5 days before the event was meant to take place, it was mysteriously, out of the blue, cancelled. And as you can guess, the people that put their money into going to this event would never see it again. In the end, there does seem to have been some consolation for the people that got scammed out of their money, which was that many of the prominent Minecrafters that were set to attend Minorama did a fan meetup for free, and it was only available to the people who got scammed. Now, keep in mind that this happened years before the Sky Does Minecraft allegations came out, and so I'm sure that a lot of people that attended that fan meetup were really happy to meet their Minecraft hero. But, knowing what we know now, I think I'd rather take an hour in the piss-covered bull pit in the back rooms than shake hands with that heathen. Back to Minorama though, still, years after this happening, we're not much closer to figuring out where the victim's money is. This wasn't the first Minecraft convention scam, or convention scam in general, but it's to my knowledge that this was perhaps one of the largest convention scams ever pulled off. And so the $500,000 was never seen again. It's spooky season, ladies and gentlemen, which means I'm going to have to give you guys a Halloween special. And what's more Halloweeny than witches, who have bizarrely made an online resurgence in the past decade or so? For that reason, in this video, we're doing a deep dive into various witches' wicked witchcraft, which has been popping up all over social media. And throughout this video, we're going to answer once and for all, should we let these witches fry at the stake or fly into the moonlight? So make sure you watch for that. And with that said, let's begin. So I think the best place to start is Witch Talk, which has been at the heart of modern witchcraft online. And let me tell you, the second that I dropped into Witch Talk, I was informed about so much witchcraft that I've participated in the past that I had no clue I was a part of. I mean, I've seen Andrew Fleming's The Craft, so obviously I know all there is to know about witchcraft. But also apparently not, because at least according to users whose videos I've watched, collecting teeth from the Tooth Fairy, kind of witchcrafty. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me, kind of a spell. Rain, rain, go away, come again another day, that is literally a spell for the skies and the weather. And so it seems as though our children have been indoctrinated into witchcraft from an early age. Now, from an outsider's perspective, I'll admit, some of this stuff looks a bit strange. For one, I thought the occult was mostly about tradition, so finding out the witches were on TikTok sounded a bit weird at first. But because this stuff is super popular with my generation, I guess TikTok does make sense. But two, some of the stuff I found here was really strange. For example, to try and get someone to love you, I saw that you could do the method of writing the name down of your crush 3 times on paper horizontally, writing your name down 3 times vertically, putting some honey in a jar, rolling the piece of paper up, placing it in a jar, filling it all up with honey, putting some cinnamon in the jar, and melting a candle on top of that jar. Now, from an outsider's perspective, that sounds fucking bonkers. But actually, I have no but. That is fucking bonkers. But I will say this. Despite how witches are portrayed in the media as menacing hags with green faces and warts on their noses and rotting teeth that like to eat children and place curses on people, flying away into the night and cackling with a high-pitched shriek, the witches on TikTok, at least the ones that I've seen, are not that. Most modern witches seem to be happy with placing protection spells on themselves and otherwise placing spells that are going to help them in life. So these spells might bring them luck, or wealth, or health, or love. Now, having said that, placing a spell on the stock market to try and get more money might seem like manipulating the system, but I say go for it, you sons of witches. Placing a spell on someone to get them to love you, maybe reconsider that one. But nonetheless, I had a very pleasant time on Witch Talk. Whether someone has placed a spell on me to get me to think that, I don't know. And I am going to put the slider closer to fly, as in fly into the moonlight, because I had a good time. Now on to our next story. So now that I've spoken about the central hub for witchcraft online, I want to talk about a very specific event, and that was when Witch Talk tried to sway the American general election. This incident made mainstream news. It was reported on Teen Vogue, Wired, and The Conversation, and it was in regards to the 2020 general election between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. This heist, I guess you could call it, was perhaps one of the largest a group of witches have ever tried to pull off. Some were casting spells in an attempt to raise a mighty blue wave, while other conjurers were employing pro-Trump counter-magics. Now, something really interesting here was that these witches were trying to employ their magic on Halloween 2020, a few days before the election. But that's not the interesting part. The interesting part was that Halloween happened to fall not only on a full moon, but also a blue moon, which is incredibly rare. Coincidence or witchcraft? I'll let you be the judge of that. Nonetheless, these witches banded together to try and cast a mighty blue wave to envelop the USA, and wash away what, in their words, were the corruption, injustice, and wickedness of Donald Trump, which, as we all know, they eventually got. But having said that, it was also their aim to allow this to be a peaceful transition of power, so I guess not even the metaphysical could have predicted January 6th. But during my research, I was actually fortunate enough to find a spell that people actually used. So it seems as though you needed both blue and red candles, blue paint, a cutout of the United States, a Justice tarot card, and a pin or nail. There was a bit of setup to do, and even a spell, which I'm not going to mess with now because I don't know if anything will happen now that the election is over, and I don't want to be one to mess with the forces that be. To try and remain impartial, I'm not going to move the slider, we'll leave it exactly where it is. So let's move on quickly before the hate comments come in. Now, Witch Talk has become a bit of a phenomenon, which I could only guess to be a good thing, right? Well, maybe not, because in August 2020, evil magic would be cast. You see, new witches are called baby witches, right? They're less experienced witches. So these baby witches, I guess they had no clue the power that they possessed at their fingertips, and foolishly tried to hex the moon, to the dismay of all of us muggles. People were not happy with them. Article after article came out with people calling out these baby witches, you know? We were like, that's our moons, stop messing with it. But if you thought the response from non-witches was bad, wait until you hear about the response from actual, more experienced witches, because they loathed this. These more experienced witches were even madder with their baby counterparts, because their actions were besmirching the name of witches. They were disrespectful to Greek deities such as Artemis and Apollo, and now their covens as a whole were being associated with these moon hexers. Not only that, but the baby witches also hexed the Fae, which according to this Twitter thread that I found, the Fae are creatures in which fairies are based upon, and they should not be trifled with. Apparently, you shouldn't even be thinking about Faes until you have years of witchcraft experience under your belt. Definitely not for beginners. To continue, it's likely that these baby witches will now have a bloodline curse, and it's also said that the Fae will probably steal their soul as well. The worst part of this all being that many of the witches who decided to hex the moon allegedly were also planning to hex the sun next, but the media has been quiet on that one. If you're worried though, you can relax, because I found an experienced witch on Twitter who said this: "The moon and sun probably don't feel a thing. The gods will take care of it. They are not hurt, just annoyed. They also won't take some kid's stupidity out on the entire human race." Many witches came out and said that hexing the moon was actually impossible, but nonetheless this was a really bad PR day for witches, Wiccans and members of the occult everywhere. It's proved something that I've seen online, which is that baby witches are not meant to hex, they're not meant to curse, they're meant to sit down, know their place and listen. But because these baby witches are alleged to have hexed the moon, I think you guys know where I'm going with this. We're going to have to move the slider down much closer to Fry, as in Fry at the stake. Okay, so this next one is something that's been happening under our very noses, and witches, you never told us about it. Apparently, guys, there is a huge demand for cursed or haunted items on eBay. Witches are out here cursing items, placing runes on them and shit, haunting their possessions, and then selling them on eBay. So much to the fact that if you go on eBay right now, they actually have their very own little category on there titled Metaphysical and New Age. And some of this stuff is meant to be real. Like, look at these creepy ass dolls. I know that if you're skeptical, you won't believe that any of these are real. And perhaps there are some scam artists out there that make money by passing off ordinary items as genuine. But on the other hand, you've also got to wager that at least one or two of these sellers are dead serious that these items are legitimately haunted. But having said that, some of the stuff I found on here, like this dragon pendant, I thought was freaking badass, so I just had to buy it. It doesn't claim to have any magical powers or anything to protect me, but I thought it was too cool not to buy. Nonetheless, scrolling down in the metaphysical category, we have such subcategories as astrology, candles, crystals and gemstones, feng shui, handmade items, incense, Ouija boards, pagan and Wiccan items, pendants and amulets, runes and tarot cards. So it's clear to see that there's an absolute ton of varied items that would be considered metaphysical. And so while yes, there is indeed a lot of cursed or haunted items being put up for sale, that's just one side of a Wicca's coin, because it's simply such a huge subculture. Most of what's being sold is, again, luck charms, protected items, or items that might be used in witchcraft, such as candles or tarot cards. But I thought I'd bring it up because this is quite wild to me personally. I had never considered that a site as large as eBay, for example, would have its own section of stuff for Wiccans and witches, but here we are. There's definitely a mixed bag of items up here, but to me this is fascinating. Just because I found the badass dragon pendant because of this, I'm gonna move the slide up closer to Fly, even if the haunted dolls are putting me off doing so. But that's my decision. Let's keep going. So the rest of this is going to be done at night time because I thought I'd get in the spirit of the holiday. So I'll briefly glance over our next story, but if we remember back a year or two ago, everything was during lockdown, right? It was COVID times. And witches still wanted to have their coven meetings, but obviously it's very tough to do that when COVID is around. So what did they do? Well, they actually have their coven meetings over Zoom. And I wanted to do a bit of research to find out what made these online coven meetings a bit different from the standard in-person ones. And so I scoured the internet and I found this article by The New Yorker, and it was published by Maeve Dunnigan. And it reads, "Thank you so much for bearing with us as we try to navigate this scary and confusing time. In order to ensure the safety and health of our coven, the Siren Sisters of Bramble Grove will now be holding our monthly ritual Satan worship and spellcasting meeting over the video conferencing platform Zoom." The post went on to say that each intended member of the coven would be met by a raven named Galgar, and he would deliver the code for the meeting. Each witch would have to have their camera and audio on to simultaneously cast their spells. As for the guest list, Satan was put down as a maybe. It seems as though they tried to get him there, but the article neither confirms nor denies if he ever actually showed up. It went on to add that Hell had only recently upgraded to iOS 10 at the time, and it ended with the message, "I know you are all looking forward to drinking goat's bile together. Maybe it could be fun to each pour individual cups of goat's bile at home and drink them on camera. We can clink our glasses through the screen as if we were at a real goat's bile happy hour. That could be really cute." And I know that a large portion of my audience are witches or Wiccans themselves. I mean, seriously, about 35% of you are either invested in the community or are witches or Wiccans yourself. I mean, I guess it kind of comes in the territory of my content, but still I'm interested to ask, how was COVID for being a witch? How were your coven meetings? Were your powers weakened? Let me know in the comments. So, of all the stories I have for you today in this Halloween special, this one is by far the darkest. So I'm going to leave a little content warning right here. Don't watch if you don't have the stomach, because this is the tale of Bongazi. Also known as the Tumblr witch who is caught grave robbing, we need to take things back to 2015, when in a Facebook group called the Queer Witch Collective came a post from a user of the name Ender Darling, who stated this message. Pause if you want to, but the quick synopsis was that 20 minutes from the poster's house in New Orleans was a graveyard usually reserved for the poor. As generally only less wealthy people were buried there, you could assume that it wasn't looked after too well, and apparently during rainstorms, bones and remains from the deceased would wash up. Here's the curveball. Then what would happen was the poster of this message would go to that graveyard and collect the washed up bones and human remains. So there's the context. And when she posted this message in her Queer Witch Collective group, you might assume that people would instantly be outraged, but surprisingly, at least early on, people were interested in her practices. Let me just move the sliding scale down a little bit. One user asked if this witch made any attempt at payment to the dead, to which Ender Darling responded that she brought drink, honey, and flowers. Before long though, people started criticizing Ender Darling for what they thought was grave robbing. Do not shame me for my work, the witch posted on Facebook. Now, one of the cornerstones of the Queer Witch Collective group was that there were absolutely no forms of shame allowed whatsoever. This was a tricky one for the mods, because if they were to, at this point, remove Ender Darling, that might be seen as letting the shamers win, but obviously keeping her in the group wouldn't have been good either. One mod questioned why people were so mad, saying that this wasn't grave desecration, just merely using resources provided by the earth. This decision to defend Ender Darling, though, would prove to be the wrong one. When people remembered one teeny, tiny important fact that Ender Darling had slipped into her original post, which was that these bones were being stolen from a graveyard in which generally impoverished people were buried, which means that the people buried there were likely marginalized and disenfranchised. And since the poster was located in New Orleans of all places, it was soon heavily theorized that the people Ender Darling was stealing bones from were likely ethnic minorities, but most likely black. I joined this group 3 weeks ago, and about 10 seconds into that tenure, I see a post about someone potentially collecting black human bones. Ender is using white supremacist and colonialist tactics to do her bidding, and this is all a bit of what I would call a hullabaloo. So yeah, white person likely taking the bones of ethnic minorities. Not good on a moral or racial standpoint. But it also needs to be stated that from a Wiccan standpoint, also not good, because more experienced witches came out to say that you're not allowed to do that if the person is not in your bloodline. If you don't know the person, if you have no ties to them, you cannot use their remains in your potions or spells. So people from the group started turning on her, and then a member of the group took a screenshot of this and posted it on her public Facebook wall, and then more people knew. Eventually the press got involved, and eventually it was taken over to Tumblr. Ender Darling, known on Tumblr as Little Fucking Monster, tried to defend herself by spouting out a bunch of claims, but no one really cared. In their eyes, Little Fucking Monster was a little fucking monster. The police were soon notified and raided her house, finding human bones, teeth, and some cannabis to go along with it. The police soon tested these remains and concluded, yes, these were actually human, and so the witch got arrested. But she did get off with a 5-year sentence with time served. After that, the trail dried up, but it has gone down in absolute infamy, and I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to move the slider down again. It was pretty awful. So we'll have to see if these witches can redeem themselves with our next story. And for this next story, I want to take things back about a decade and talk about the resurgence of witchcraft in Romania. Because ever since the rise of social media, there has definitely been an uptake in the region. Obviously, most people, when they think of Romania, think of it as the place where vampires are from. But in the modern day, it seems as though the locals are much more interested in witchcraft, and they have been for quite a long time. Obviously, witchcraft and curses are really big in Eastern Europe. I remember back to the Ukrainian lady at the start of the Russian invasion that cursed the soldiers, for example. And that curse has been coming in clutch, especially recently. But back on topic, these Romanian witches over the past decade or two have been casting spells to try and push their political agenda. For example, in 2011, it was reported by Joshua Keating that angry Romanian witches were using cat excrement and dead dogs to cast spells on the president and government because their profession was about to be taxed. Many of these Romanians claimed that they were already horribly strapped for cash and didn't have enough money to make ends meet. But nonetheless, professions such as witches, astrologers, fortune tellers, and embalmers were soon to be taxed. I couldn't find much online saying that the government went back on their original decision. Romanian news doesn't exactly travel fast to British news sources, if at all. So it's to my understanding that they were indeed taxed, despite putting a curse on the government. Still, you know what, I think I'll push the slider up to fly because I just got taxed for the first time and I hate it. So I can understand where these witches are coming from. So there we have it. I guess my penny pinching saved the day, and we'll have to let these witches fly into the moonlight. They won't be getting burned today. Throughout my research, I was pleasantly surprised with how vast witchcraft was. I can definitely say that my preconceived notions of the lifestyle was perhaps a bit naive, a bit too heavily fed by the media. But I think that my career in the metaphysical will probably end here today. But I respect witchcraft a bit more than I once did. It was in May of 2019, when reports broke surrounding one of the largest breaches of online privacy ever recorded. One of the largest social media apps in the world, known as Snapchat, was caught up in the middle of a scandal that had been reported by several of the most reputable news outlets out there, in which several of their employees were said to have abused their position to access their users' data and to spy on them. It was a normal Thursday, when just shy of 8:45 in the evening, Joseph Cox of Vice's tech department named Motherboard would release an article that would forevermore discredit Snapchat's reputation. And what Motherboard would find was damning, to say the least. They were able to obtain facts and statements from numerous former employees, one current employee, and a cache of internal company emails to discover that a few years before the report dropped, likely at some point in the early to mid-2010s, there were Snapchat workers that abused their power to access their users' personal information, such as their phone numbers, email addresses, saved snaps, and perhaps most worryingly of all, their location. It goes without saying that this was a huge violation of their users' privacy, but even more so for an app such as Snapchat, which had a huge draw of being the app of anonymity many years ago. Snaps would only be able to be seen for a few seconds and then would be permanently deleted into the void. Or at least, so people thought. The idea that these Snapchat employees would breach their own rules and violate their users' privacy should have been very concerning to many. But it was actually this app's unique selling point which would lead to this espionage later on. Because it doesn't take a genius to know that disappearing messages would be very useful for people intent on breaking the law, as we'll further delve into later in the video. Law enforcement worked with Snapchat to develop a tool named SnapLion, which worked to access users' data so that when requested, Snapchat could give it over to the police. SnapLion itself is a play on words in reference to law enforcement officer, or LEO, Leo, Lion. According to various sources, it was claimed that Snapchat's customer ops department as well as their security department had access to SnapLion, which reportedly held the keys to the kingdom, and whose existence wasn't known about to the public prior to this Vice article dropping. Now, I think it's important to mention that tools similar to SnapLion aren't inherently a bad thing. They're actually the industry standard and can be very helpful in law enforcement cases. They can oftentimes be the difference between a criminal being locked up and walking free. But when handled incorrectly, we have such incidents as we had here, when consumers' privacy has been clearly violated. Snapchat would come out to say that they took these sorts of matters very seriously, and that anyone who violated their business conduct would be immediately fired. Though even having said that, Snapchat have since come out and said they're now not exclusively only using SnapLion in collaboration with law enforcement, is being more commonly used throughout the company, meaning that though in theory this should be used professionally, who actually knows if it will be in practice? This was just one of the many controversies and scandals that Snapchat have found itself caught up in over the past few years. But it's also one that perhaps hasn't been reported about as much as it should have been. This is clearly a huge violation of privacy, and when looking it up on YouTube, it's very hard to find videos about it. And it has to make you wonder, what else are they hiding? So in this video, over the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to air Snapchat's dirty laundry from the past decade or so for the whole world to see. Dirty laundry such as the allegations against their billionaire CEO Evan Spiegel, who had previously been accused of racism by a former employee. The story here is that back in 2015, there was a man of the name Anthony Popliano who was temporarily employed by Snapchat for a total of 3 weeks, during which time he claims that the CEO stated that he didn't want the app to expand into what he called poorer countries such as India and Spain. These allegations broke in April of 2017 and were promptly and entirely ignored by the Spanish. They didn't care whatsoever. But over in India, it was a bit of a different story. By the time this story broke, Snapchat had over 4 million active users within India, many of whom, upon finding out this new story, boycotted the app, deleted it, and spread the accusations around. But it could be argued that they might have been a bit too hasty to do this, because Snapchat would immediately clap back at this and say that the accusations were entirely ridiculous. And it also needs to be said that the person who originally made these claims, Anthony Popliano, would later take Snapchat to court in a case that was immediately thrown out by the judge. To say that he only worked there for 3 weeks, that he had clearly a bad reputation with the company, and that he was the only person since to claim that Spiegel said these sorts of things was peculiar to say the least. I really don't know if he's the most reliable source to come out with this stuff. On top of that, back in the mid-2010s, the world was made aware of the large online market that India could dominate, because it would only be a few years later, in 2018, that T-Series, an Indian brand, would become the most subscribed YouTube channel in the world. These sorts of trends would be seen way in advance by social media experts, so it would really make no sense to say these sorts of things about such a large and upcoming market. But having said that, not I, nor you, nor any journalist in the world can say for certain what happens behind the closed doors of Snapchat's headquarters. So there is a chance that Mr. Spiegel did in fact say those things. But from one Asian-based controversy to another, our next story is going to be very controversial. If you're new to this channel, we like to respectfully talk about dicey and controversial topics here. But just a fair warning, that's exactly what we're going to do now, because in August of 2016, Snapchat was accused of adding a filter that's been described as yellowface. Just in case you don't know what yellowface is, it's essentially the Asian equivalent of blackface. And that summer, Snapchat came under intense scrutiny for adding a filter which many people think has exaggerated racist Asian features, such as slanted eyes. Now, Snapchat responded to this by saying that this was meant to be an anime-inspired filter, it was just meant to look like you're an anime character. Obviously, anime is of Japanese origin, it's a Japanese art style, and throughout anime, there have been a number of famous characters whose eyes are similar to this filter. So whether this was intentionally or maybe even unintentionally racist, or whether people were just making a mountain out of a molehill, that's for you to decide. But this wasn't the first time that people have deemed a Snapchat filter to be racist. There have been claims for years now that filters cater to white beauty standards because most of them seem to lighten the skin tone, which is especially disastrous for me and the rest of the Pale Gang because I look like Casper the pasty white ghost in half of my Snapchat pics. But there was also criticism held against it for the Bob Marley filter on 420, with many people saying that the reggae legend was just being seen as nothing more than a weed mascot, and some people even thought that it was blackface. I haven't really used Snapchat too much recently, but I definitely used it back then, and I remember that filters came and went extremely quickly. They'd kind of be there for a week and then they would just go, and that was the case for this Asian anime-inspired filter. The so-called yellow face filter left the app just as quickly as it came on to offend people, never to return again because of the uproar. But what do you think? Were these filters actually racist, or do you think it was just a bit more of light-hearted fun that was taken way out of context? But in the past, Snapchat filters haven't just come under fire because of their potential racism. Believe it or not, they've actually come under scrutiny because some people think that they could be deadly. Like it or not, there have been instances in the past where people's lives have almost been the forfeit of a Snapchat filter. And I'm thinking of one in particular. Of course, it is the speed measuring filter, which has actually been recently banned by the platform. And this is why. If you've used Snapchat in the past, you might be familiar with it, but just in case you're not, Snapchat back in the day added a bunch of filters that would track a bunch of stuff. You could tag your location, the day of the week, the time, the temperature, as well as what speed you were going at. The idea of this was that if you were in a plane and traveling at hundreds of miles an hour, for instance, that would be quite a cool snap to send to your friends. But some people would take this love of social media a bit too far. For example, back in 2016, there was a then 18-year-old named Crystal McGee who was behind the wheel of a Mercedes and tried to go 100 miles an hour to post it on Snapchat. She lost control of her car though and crashed into another vehicle owned by a man named Maynard Wentworth, who was an Uber driver just beginning his shift. He would subsequently spend 5 weeks in the ICU and suffered injuries that left him unable to work. The road this incident occurred on only had a speed limit of 55 miles an hour, but based on crash reenactments, it's thought that McGee could have been going upwards of 107 miles an hour with passengers in her car. Wentworth would take both Snapchat and McGee to court, but the judge ruled that Snapchat would be granted immunity and wouldn't be held responsible for what McGee was doing. And what she was doing was, in my opinion, one of the most idiotic things I have ever heard. She almost killed a man to try and get some arbitrary social media points. What the fuck? But it might have given me one of my favourite pictures on the internet ever. Let me clarify that I don't know if this is 100% real, but based on a bunch of articles that I've read about the situation, I keep seeing this one image, which appears to be McGee taking a selfie in a stretcher. And if we're talking about health concerns, allow me to point you in the direction of a new medical term, I guess, called Snapchat dysmorphia. Though it's hard to believe, this is a new term that's been reported on by Everyday Health, The Guardian, and Healthline. And you might be wondering, what is Snapchat dysmorphia? And I'll tell you. So this is a term coined in the past 5 years or so by cosmetic doctor Tijon Esho, and it refers to people who insistently fixate on their real life physical appearance compared to what they look like on a Snapchat filter. But obviously it doesn't just have to be a Snapchat filter, this applies to any sort of social media filter. The problem that many people have grown up accustomed to is that these filters are blurring the lines between what's real and what's fake. Your real face looks similar to these filters, but you're not the same. Your skin isn't as clear, your eyes aren't as well shaped, your eyebrows aren't quite as full, and so people are comparing their real faces to these fake, filtered, airbrushed and photoshopped versions of themselves and feeling really bad about it afterwards. Now, it's important to mention that this is not a medical diagnosis in the slightest. It's just a phrase that's risen in popularity over the past 5 or so years. But there have been a lot of plastic surgeons that have had patients come in and said the reason that they want to get their plastic surgery is because they don't feel comfortable in their own skin, their own body, because of these filters on social media. And that's really, really sad. There's an entire list of supposed symptoms and whatnot, but the most common ones are that you think that no picture of yourself is ever right, you always want to change something, that posting and taking selfies will cause you anxiety, and that you compare yourself against the impossible to obtain airbrushed versions of yourself. Let me say that for as bizarre as this is, and for as much as people will laugh at you because you've given yourself a complex because of social media, you are enough. Just the way you are. You do not need to look like those filters, because I'll tell you what, a lot of them are just straight up clapped. No matter what you look like, you're enough. But you also need to take responsibility and distance yourself from social media because it clearly is not healthy for you. I think that Snapchat, more than most social media platforms, have had people in the past develop really unhealthy relationships towards it, and I think that one of these symptoms is obsessively stalking people on Snap Maps. Because, yeah, this is just a thing right now, and nobody seems to bat an eye about it, so let's discuss. It's going on 6 years now that Snap Maps dropped, and I still remember that when it came out, I would have been right at the proper age demographic to be really hooked on Snapchat, and according to my cringe-ass memories at the time, yeah, I was. But I definitely remember going to school right after it released, and talking to people who really felt like their privacy had been invaded. If you don't know what Snap Maps is, it's essentially this opt-in thing where when you open Snapchat up, you can click on this button so you can see where all of your friends are the last time they had Snapchat open. Which I'm sure has never caused any problems in friendships or relationships ever. Yeah, I mean, using Snap Maps isn't necessary in the slightest, but it's still weird that this is a thing. I looked up online how people reacted to the update when it dropped, and they seemed to share the same sentiment. They thought it was a bit creepy that if you've got it turned on, you would just be susceptible to stalking. And once again, this is a reality that we've just since accepted, that literally anyone on our friends list could know exactly where we are at any given moment as long as we've had Snapchat open. But having said that, I'll probably just keep mine on. I've had mine on for the past 6 years. I've got really nothing to hide. I'm not a cheater. I'm not living a second life. I usually don't blow off plans with friends, so mine's just gonna stay on. It can of course come in handy sometimes. For example, if someone's been abducted or they go missing and they've had their Snapchat open, you can trace them, you can track them, you can find them. So what do you think? Was this a good thing? I'm really not too sure. But I am sure that back in March of 2018, Snapchat fell into some really hot water after being accused of making a joke out of domestic violence. The year was 2009, and Rihanna was meant to play at the Grammys, but her performance was abruptly cancelled after reports surfaced that her then boyfriend Chris Brown had physically assaulted her. Long story short, Chris Brown would plead guilty to the charges and was given 5 years of probation, as well as being legally required to stay at least 50 yards or 46 meters away from Rihanna. This was huge news at the time, but it's only natural that in the years since then, it's become more and more of a distant memory. It gets spoken about less and less, but in March 2018, people's attention would once again be drawn to the sad event, as Snapchat would launch a new ad campaign, which was sort of a would you rather style of game. The point of the controversy comes in though when you see that one of the would you rathers were punch Chris Brown or slap Rihanna, which was immediately jumped on by her fans and the media because it seemed very insensitive to domestic abuse victims. Rihanna took to Snapchat's rival platform Instagram to announce her disgust for the campaign, leading to a disastrous loss of revenue for Snapchat. Shares in the company dropped 5% overnight, and it was later estimated that in total, the company lost $1 billion in value. Many Rihanna fans, as well as people who suffered from domestic violence, boycotted the app in the fallout of this. In response to this, Snapchat claimed that it was a mistake that this ad ever ran in the first place, claiming that it violated their own guidelines, and adding an apology to Rihanna. This severely hurt the company's image, and though Snapchat claimed it was a mistake, it led many people to wonder how it was even greenlit in the first place. And while we're talking about green, it's no secret that Snapchat has been in the centre of drug deals for a long time now. Or maybe it is a secret to you. Either way, I don't want to be a snitch, so if you're a law enforcement officer, please click off this video now. But yeah, this is one of the most popular apps that people contact their dealers on because of the anonymity of it. Messages disappear, so unlike Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp, it's harder to trace who's bought what. This isn't to say that people don't contact their dealers through other apps, but Snapchat is one of, if not the main social media platform for this. But it might not be for too much longer, because over the past few years, Snapchat has kind of built up a reputation for this. Most people that I know that use Snapchat frequently do it for hookups or drugs. But in 2022, the app was under the microscope because it appears as though more and more teenagers especially are using the app to purchase illegal substances. Believe it or not, I don't do drugs at all, and I'm not just saying that because my family watches these videos sometimes. I was raised right, they don't really interest me whatsoever, so it would be a bit crap if I tried to explain this, so I found an article published by NBC. It was written by Olivia Solon in October 2021, and it seems to have a better grasp on the situation than I could ever tell you, so we're just going to read off that. It reads, counterfeit prescription pills that look like legitimate medications such as Percocet, OxyContin, and Xanax, but actually contain contain a dose of potent synthetic opioid fentanyl have been linked to a wave of deaths in the United States over the last few years. And 2 in 5 of those tested in the United States contain enough fentanyl to kill. It went on to say that Snapchat have increased their detection tools for this kind of stuff, leading to a 112% increase in accounts being banned from the platform in the first half of 2021. If users search up fentanyl in the Snapchat search bar, they'll receive a PSA on the dangers of drugs. But unfortunately, this doesn't seem to have made too much of an impact, because even as recently as last week, Fox News reported a further 8 fentanyl-related deaths spread across 6 states from pills purchased on Snapchat. Tragically, each of these people were aged between 15 and 22 and had their entire lives cut short. Snapchat themselves will come out and say that there was still a lot of action left to be taken, and based off that, they're not wrong. There's still a lot more to be done, because young people especially are still dying. But because this is such a large part of Snapchat, I want to take the time to delve into a single story in particular and shift the focus from the people that are consuming these substances to the people that are dealing them. And for that, I want to introduce you to the UK drug queenpin, Henna Ashraf. That's right, ladies and gents, we're not talking about a drug kingpin for this next story, but instead a queenpin. Because it's 2023, everyone knows that women can run drug empires just as well as a man can. Don't forget it. It was such a big achievement in women's rights. Sorry. Anyway, she was caught by the police. Now, I'm not sure if this had anything to do with her capture, but it definitely helped convict her because she was said to brag a lot about what she was doing on Snapchat, reportedly having broadcast getting a £500 haircut in an upmarket salon in Knightsbridge, which is an upscale area bordering Hyde Park in London, which has surely got to be a red flag in itself. Like, I don't know how much women usually pay for a haircut, but anything more than like £100 has surely got to be paid with blood money, right? But anyways, I'm getting off track. She also posted pictures of her new flashy Mercedes on Snapchat too, and she'd send messages to people she knew on the app, flaunting her drug empire and wealth. It was in her Mercedes though, where her empire would turn to rubble as the police pulled her over on the M5 near Junction 24. She allegedly threw an object believed to be Class A drugs out the window, and the police also discovered a broken Nokia phone wedged between the seats. But despite her best efforts to cover her tracks, the police would soon build a case against her, and she was put behind bars for 3.5 years. And for this next story, we're turning the clock back 10 years, because although today, Snapchat really isn't known as an easy target for hackers, a decade ago, the same thing couldn't be said. You see, at the very end of 2013, it was reported by major news outlets that hackers had breached Snapchat and downloaded the usernames, general location, as well as the emails attached to them of 4.6 million users. This was only 2 years after the social media app launched, and it was starting to get very popular around this point, so it was a really bad look for them. These hackers would post the usernames on a since taken down website, blurring out the ends of the phone numbers and usernames, which claimed to have collected information on just over 4.6 million people located in 76 different area codes. But the real kicker of this was that Snapchat had a fair amount of prior warning before these events unfolded, as there was an Australian firm named Gibson Security which publicly warned Snapchat that it had some vulnerabilities in its app which could be easily exploited by hackers. The platform seemed disinterested in this warning, but would eventually pay the price. Gibson Security had warned Snapchat about these weaknesses 4 months prior to the hacking, but since no action was taken, they were essentially sitting ducks. And this hacking would, for a time, damage their reputation in the eyes of many. Especially with Snapchat being the app of privacy, people wondered if hackers could get these details, what else could they intercept? And that very question would be answered months later after hackers posted nearly 100,000 explicit images to the internet that were thought to have been taken on the app. And so the platform just had to undertake new measures to protect their users. These days, Snapchat is thought to be much more secure, with many of the ex-employees in the first story I told you guys giving it fair dues and saying that the app security is quite tight. So unless it gets hacked in the future and this part of the video ages horrendously, people seem to be much more confident in the app security these days. But the way had to be paved by mistakes first and foremost. Let's jump right into this one. Amazon is one of the most profitable businesses in the world. It's an online marketplace where you could buy almost anything from your wildest and wettest dreams, from the letter A to the letter Z. But by being one of the largest businesses in the world, and one that I'm sure at least 80% of you guys use, it has a target put on its back. One that many mainstream news outlets have attacked, but not really many content creators. There seems to be a gap in this market, a gap that I wanted to fill, and so I googled Amazon controversies and I found this Wikipedia page. Longer than the Bible and more rich in information than any of Albert Einstein's publications. Fellow creators, you have been caught lacking because this is an untouched treasure trove and I'm about to share the booty with all of you. These are just a few of Amazon's cold-blooded controversies, and I'm not just saying that because I think Bezos is a reptilian. So first things first, I really don't want to dwell too much on news stories that the mainstream media have told 1,000 times. I will touch on them, don't worry, but for the most part, I want to tell you guys some stories that you might not know. So let's start with medical misinformation that has apparently ran rife on the site. These most commonly come in the form of books that they sell and promote, but it's important to state that though they might host these readings on their platform, these books are not written by people at Amazon. One of the largest headlines in reference to this controversy was that Amazon was plugging a book that was apparently spreading vaccine misinformation. These reports and articles went out in late 2021, when vaccines were finally being used around the West. And the fear was that if this was in fact misinformation, firstly, Amazon was profiting off of it, and secondly, it shouldn't be allowed to be up there in the first place. US Senator Elizabeth Warren accused the e-commerce giant of being either unwilling or unable to modify its business practices to prevent the spread of falsehoods or the sale of inappropriate products. But just based off pure statistics, there's a very likely chance that there's a few of you guys watching this video right now that are anti-vaxxers. So let's give you the benefit of the doubt and say that what they're saying in these books is actually true. But we'll also take Marco Zanone, a researcher of public health and misinformation, as another example. He was on Amazon when he found a bit of a rabbit hole there, because he found more than a dozen books on the site that claim to cure cancer via unproven methods, such as Gerson therapy, which is claimed to be a vegetarian diet-based healing process, as well as alkaline detox and even urine therapy. In an interview with Rebecca Robinson of codastory.com, Zanone would say, "Amazon is making money from these products. They have a duty to make sure that the products they sell don't cause harm. And I think, in this case, offering false hope and fake cancer treatments cause harm, especially to a very vulnerable group." The point is that Amazon self-regulates, which means they have the ability to promote products or remove them from their site if they see so fit. Now, I rarely like to advocate for censorship, and I won't here. It's really your take. Do Amazon have a moral responsibility to remove unscientifically backed theories and ideas? I have my own stance, but what's yours? Especially when it comes to medical information, data is naturally sensitive. And that was why a couple of years ago, there was outrage in the UK after our NHS gave over its data to Amazon's virtual assistant, Alexa. Let's talk about it. So first things first, in case you don't know what the NHS is, it's essentially the UK's healthcare system. It's existed since 1948, and it's for the most part both free and universal. It's absolutely amazing, and every Brit I know loves it to pieces, but we don't like when it gets fucked with, which coincidentally happens to be quite a lot. So you can just imagine the reaction that it got once the NHS gave over its information to Alexa, and that was surprisingly lukewarm? Yeah, even with me living in the UK, I must have missed this news story because this is the first that I've ever heard of it. The tale goes that our since disgraced former Health Secretary Matt Hancock made the point that a partnership with the NHS would allow Alexa to offer health advice to users of the service. But a running theme in the UK is that our NHS staff is always overworked and underpaid. They're working tirelessly, but it's always way too busy. So perhaps on paper, yeah, I mean, you might be able to ease some pressure on it, but on the other hand, a quick trip to Google, type in your symptoms, and you'll find out that you have every disease known to man and should have died 3 weeks ago. And yeah, even though it wasn't in the news very much, the public simply didn't want this. A YouGov poll surprisingly found that 80% of Brits didn't want Silicon Valley having their medical data, and it's been said that people are generally uncomfortable with the commercial exploitation of their health data. But if you're from the USA, laugh this up while you can, because apparently before this happened in November 2019, Google was granted access to the healthcare information of 50 million Americans. So it looks like we're in the same boat here, lads. Amazon knows just as much about the suspicious mole on my ass as Google knows about your oddly shaped belly button. This invasion of privacy might only be rivaled by Amazon's tracking of your cookies and the controversy of differential pricing that this has caused. For our next case, we need to go back a long time, before many of you were born, or even I was born, to September of 2000. Because this was the time that there was some criticism levied against Amazon for what's been described as price discrimination. Essentially, this is where a company tracks your cookies and will change the prices of goods and services depending on what they find. This means that the exact same item might be priced differently to two different people. And this was all discovered after a user bought a DVD for one price, deleted his cookies, and then refreshed the page, discovering that after, the site no longer identified him as a customer, and so they offered him the DVD at a lower price, which apparently violated the Robinson-Patman Act of 1936, whereby it's illegal to offer the same product at different prices, right? This is called price discrimination, when you're offering the same product at two different prices. And I'm not going to say that I know an incredible amount about a going on 90-year-old American law, but I do know that in the modern day, it really doesn't hold up as strongly as it used to. Because student and senior citizen discounts are both common forms of price discrimination, but you would never see old Gladys try to use her senior citizen's discount and then just get chucked in the back of the police van, right? The thing is, I feel like the internet has made this kind of thing a lot easier. I don't know if this is too commonplace around the rest of the world, but at least here in the UK, when you're booking a flight, you best go undercover, secret agent mode on incognito, because the second that your browser finds out that you want to go on a flight, they'll raise the price. Jeff Bezos would come out and say that this was some sort of price testing program that was immediately discontinued. But according to some online sources I found, apparently as of 2019, it's come back. And once again, your cookies can and will be tracked, so even after you've put something that you're interested in into your cart, it could jump up a few pounds. Maybe society's views have just been growing tired over this for the past couple of years and they just don't really care anymore. Or maybe I'm talking shite. I don't know. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, yeah, that's a bit of an invasion of privacy, but it's not necessarily that controversial. And you know what? I hear you loud and clear. Let's talk about animal cruelty. If you're listening to what the media have to say about Amazon, most of the points they discuss are about workers' rights and how unfairly they're being treated. These are absolutely fair points to discuss, don't get me wrong, but they don't really touch too much about animal cruelty on the online marketplace. And believe me when I say there is some serious meat on the bones to this topic. And the first instance of what might be deemed as animal cruelty can be dated all the way back to 2007, because this was the year that the Humane Society of the United States, or the HSUS, filed a lawsuit against Amazon as it had been selling both dogfighting videos and cockfighting magazines. The dogfighting videos in particular were absolutely horrifying, with a reported 18 dogs being shown killed in it. In the fallout of this, one of the cockfighting magazines, that being The Gamecock, was banned from the platform. The other one, titled The Feathered Warrior, was allowed to stay on. It's also to my understanding that all of the dogfighting videos were additionally removed from the site. So that was the first time that Amazon had been accused of animal cruelty, but it would by no means be the last. Foie gras, for example, has been the subject of much criticism over the past few years, with many people saying that its production is inhumane. To go over its production quickly, you fatten up the liver of a bird, commonly a goose or a duck, and you do this by force-feeding it way too much food over 12 to 18 days. Many people see this as a 2 to 2.5 week long torture. As of 2013, Amazon had agreed to stop selling foie gras on the UK site, but it still might be available elsewhere in the world, especially in countries in which foie gras is not illegal. Here's just a quick map to show you where you can and can't buy it. In the blue, you have countries that are dominant producers of the controversial consumable, and these countries seem to include Canada, France, China, and northern Spain, as well as a few Eastern European countries. In red, these are the countries that have banned it, so most of Europe, the UK included in that, India, Argentina, Australia, Turkey, and California being the sole US state. And then in white are countries that don't care. But this isn't the only time that Amazon have ever been roasted because of their meats. Back at a press conference in 2019, Jeff Bezos was interrupted by an animal protester who got within a few feet of him before being stopped by security. Now, it's difficult to decipher exactly what she's saying, but an animal rights group called Direct Action Everywhere claimed responsibility. They claimed that she was protesting animal cruelty as an Amazon chicken supplier in Petaluma, California, aptly named Petaluma Poultry. Amazon itself both has its own pantry and owns Whole Foods, both of which sell poultry. And Petaluma Poultry itself was actually occupied for a time by members of Direct Action Everywhere. They live-streamed it on Facebook as 150 people marched down the road and attempted to rescue the birds at the farm. But unfortunately for them, within 2 hours of their protest, law enforcement began making arrests. A total of 4 activists would later make an appearance in court because of this, but this was by no means their first nor their last protest on the farm. These people demanded that Jeff Bezos gave them a firm response about what he was going to do about it, but it seems as though his silence might have been answer enough. From animals back to humans, we're staying in the late 2000s for this next story to discuss anti-Semitism on the site, because it was in 2008 where people were found to be selling t-shirts that were featuring Nazi slogans. Yes, this is something that actually happened, but it's also a very sensitive subject, so let's handle it with care. Back about 15 years ago, a Czech weekly magazine called Tiden called attention towards a number of t-shirts that were emblazoned with what many people deemed to be offensive slogans and words such as "I love Heinrich Himmler," "I love Hitler," and "I love Reinhard Heydrich." Himmler and Heydrich, if you don't know them, were both high-ranking Nazi officers. And obviously Hitler was Hitler. These are just a few examples of the t-shirts that were being sold, but apparently there were many more, which many people and organisations, including the World Jewish Congress, found to be simply inappropriate on the marketplace. In response to this, Amazon had a crackdown on these sorts of shirts from its marketplace, as well as other items, including a Hitler Youth knife and a 1933 SS officer's dagger. However, just like the animal abuse accusations from a moment ago, this isn't the only relevant anti-Semitism case. We actually have more stories to do with this. Relevant to this case specifically, we're talking about books that have been deemed to be Nazi propaganda. The CEO of the World Jewish Congress would write a letter to Bezos in which they stated, "No one should profit from the sale of such vile and offensive hate literature. Many Holocaust survivors are deeply offended by the fact that the world's largest online retailer is making money from selling such material." This letter was written back in 2013, but for the most part, it seemed as though it had fallen on deaf ears because it would take 4 years for Amazon to act. It was only back in 2017 that they would actually do anything and ban these books. The World Jewish Congress said that they were happy in the future to point out books that they deemed were promoting or glorifying hatred, which is a step in the right direction for sure, but with all that said, you could have still bought Nazi paraphernalia in the US and Canada all the way up to 2016, but it doesn't stop there. Alarmingly, during the winter of 2019 on Amazon, people were able to find Auschwitz-themed Christmas ornaments. The Auschwitz Memorial Twitter account would publicly call on Amazon to remove them from the marketplace, which Amazon quickly did within a day or so of this news story breaking. But once again, people would criticize Amazon because they thought that it was inappropriate that they were ever there in the first place. But whether or not you hold them accountable for even hosting these items, it's a lot harder to defend their treatment of workers. Let's talk about it. As I said at the start, I want the majority of this video to be about things that people didn't know, so like by now I feel as though everyone knows about the pee bottles, right? If you didn't know about them, they exist. So I thought I'd go just a little bit deeper to talk about their working conditions and single out one point in particular, and that is Amazon's absolute opposement of labour unions. Because did you know that they've been known to fire workers that have been thinking of unionising in the past? In 2001 alone, they laid off 850 employees in Seattle, Washington after they had planned to unionise. Then in 2018, in a leaked training video, it was stated that the company wasn't anti-union. No, of course not. Anti-union? No, we're not anti-union. But they also said that they weren't neutral on the situation either, and I have a sneaking suspicion that they're not pro-union. So where does that leave us? Well, I say we should get our trusty magnifying glasses out and scout around for clues to see what their stance on unions are. Here's a piece of evidence for you. The National Labour Relations Board found that Amazon had illegally fired 2 women for attempting to organise workers. But even that wasn't the end of the company's mistreatment of workers that thought of unionising, because a year and a half later, in May of 2022, it was reported in The Guardian that they had fired 6 New York-based managers that had been involved in a warehouse union. These managers had been with the company upwards of 6 years before getting the sack. And then there was the fascinating case of Jonathan Bailey. If you consider yourself a conspiracy theorist, why not put on your little tinfoil hat for this one? Mr. Bailey co-founded a union called Amazonians United, and during the pandemic, he organised a walkout over COVID safety concerns. Management, though, allegedly didn't like this one bit, and supposedly had an intense conversation with Bailey about it. A week later, they would give him a write-up for harassment, despite the fact that management wouldn't tell him who filed the complaint, nor what he had allegedly done. Bailey believes that this was Amazon's way to try and silence him. For this reason, in May 2020, he filed a charge against Amazon, alleging that the company had violated labour law by retaliating against him for protected, concerted activities. The board found merit to the allegations and filed a federal complaint against Amazon, and the company would eventually settle in March 2021. Bailey's charge was just one of the 37 filed to the National Labour Relations Board in the early stages of the pandemic. Now, Amazon is the second largest employer within the USA, so to try and give you guys some scope on the situation, I want to compare them to the largest employer, that being Walmart. While Amazon had 37 charges filed against them, Walmart had just 8. Keep in mind, according to US global investors, Walmart have roughly 700,000 more employees than Amazon, despite having almost 5 times less complaints in this time. Again, it's no secret that Amazon have been under fire in the past for the treatment of their workers, but if you didn't know about their stance on unions, now you do. But it's not just your everyday worker that Amazon is alleged to have gone after. Of course, Amazon is one of the largest companies in the world, and so it's only natural that it would have a few enemies. But fortunately for Amazon, they tend to have the means of distributing their rivals' products. So there have been occasions in the past where they decided to themselves that they just wouldn't. An incident related to this that I want to talk about can be dated back to October of 2015, since this was when Amazon announced that both Apple TV and Google Chromecast products were banned from being sold on the site. This is actually something that happened. Bezos took shots at both Apple and Google because by the end of the month, some of their products would be taken off of Amazon's virtual shelves. You might be wondering for what reason this might be, but it's probably the most likely answer that you could think of. Amazon has their Fire TV, which is in direct competition with Apple TV and the Google Chromecast. But it actually might go a little bit deeper than that, because when they launched, both the Apple TV and Google Chromecast did not contain Amazon Prime Video. So Amazon might have seen this as them firing the first shot, and so it said, if you're not going to have Prime on your TVs, we just won't sell them. It wouldn't be until December of 2017, more than 2 full years after banning Apple TV, that the two companies were able to strike up a deal, adding Prime to the Apple TV and allowing the product back on Amazon. But personally, I just find this so fascinating because this is just one moment in the past, and there have been many, that Amazon has shown that it's not afraid to puff its chest out and raise its chin and remove its direct competition's products from its platform. This especially happens with Google because the two seem to have a real fierce rivalry. It seems as though that at least for a time, Amazon and Google had some serious beef. Because as well as having the Chromecast banned, Amazon had also suppressed Google Home because it directly competes with Amazon Echo. In retaliation, Google would block YouTube from Amazon Fire TV products, and so the two companies, almost like petulant little children, just sat there with all of their toys and they didn't let the other one play with them. Because just like some sort of weird hostage exchange, back in the summer of 2019, the two would do a swap. And so YouTube was added to Fire TVs and Amazon Prime Video would be added to the Chromecast. But tales of Amazon taking a swipe at its direct competition don't just stop there though, because in December of 2019, Bezos set his eyes on Musk. This was after the technology company and everyone's favourite coupon service Honey, not sponsored by the way, was bought out by PayPal, which is owned by Musk. Amazon then said that their users should uninstall Honey as it posed as a security risk. Though, this might have not been because they wanted to take aim at PayPal, but maybe that they just didn't want people using discount codes on their products. But even still, Amazon does not accept PayPal as a method of payment, and since PayPal was once part of eBay, it makes sense that these companies have an unsavory history together. It was on the 6th of January 2012 when a man of the name Mike Daisey, an American monologuist, author and actor, appeared on an episode of the highly popular radio program and podcast This American Life. On this podcast, over the next 60 minutes, he would essentially ruin his reputation and credibility forever. But to get to how this happened, we need to turn back the clock a few years, to 2010. When he had a one-man show called The Agony and Ecstasy of Steve Jobs. In this show, he described his absolute adoration of Apple products, but also his disappointment in the way in which these products were being created, having claimed to have gone to Shenzhen in China and having experienced the shocking and disturbing conditions at Apple factories, including child labour, employees working long hours, and hazardous working conditions. This success gave Mike Daisey a step up in notoriety, and so 2 years later, when he was going to restart running his one-man show at New York's Public Theatre, he would go to feature on This American Life in an episode titled Mr. Daisey and the Apple Factory. In this episode, he would perform an excerpt of his show to drum up some buzz, and it did, quickly. This episode of the podcast became the most downloaded in the show's history, but there was just one problem though. Mike Daisey was lying, or at the very least, stretching the truth. As it turns out, it later emerged that many of the details included in Daisey's story were not entirely true. This American Life would soon retract the episode, and this left Daisey to have to admit that he had fabricated some of his details to make a more compelling story. Daisey was accused firstly of exaggerating the number of plants, people and underage workers that he had talked to, and also of claiming that the factory guards had guns among other things. He would make a formal apology to This American Life, and in future productions of his show, he removed a 5-minute segment in which these contested details were featured. This controversy really did spark a debate in the ethics of storytelling, and it also raised questions about the responsibilities of journalists and artists when it comes to accurately portraying truthful information in their work, especially when it comes to important and complex social issues. At the end of the day, there were some parts of Daisey's story which were true, but by mixing it in with false statements, many people felt as though this discredited the entire thing. Was it okay to exaggerate if the intent was to shine a light on a problem that hadn't been widely publicised at the time? Did the ends justify the means here? What do you guys think? So that was just one of the many stories we have today, because in this video we're looking at just a few of the most controversial podcast moments of all time. And we're doing this because I want to be in a podcast. Just get me on a podcast right now. If you have a podcast, hit me up. I'll go on it. I want to be on a podcast. Please. But with that said, let's move on to our second story of the day, and this one concerns Radiolab. If you don't know Radiolab, it's a weekly long-form journalism podcast that's been running since 2002, and since then it's stood the test of time, being known around the internet as fairly reliable. But it would fall into hot water back in 2012 after downplaying what's been called a tragedy by some of Southeast Asia's indigenous people. So a few questions here. Firstly, what is yellow rain? And second of all, why would indigenous people be offended by it? Well, to answer that, we need to take things back to the mid-1970s. For after the communist victories in Southeast Asia in 1975, the new regimes in Vietnam and Laos launched pacification campaigns against the Hmong tribes who had assisted the former non-communist governments and their principal ally, the United States. The Hmong people, for those of you who don't know, are an indigenous group that are located throughout Southeast Asia and Southwest China. That summer though, in 1975, refugees began to report that Laotian aircrafts were dropping an oily yellow liquid that made a sound like rain when it fell on roofs, roads or leaves, what the Hmong people called yellow rain. High-dose exposure to this substance reportedly caused symptoms such as bleeding from the nose and gums, tremors, seizures, blindness, and in some cases, even death. And to this day, we don't know for certain what this yellow rain was, or who was using it, though there have been theories. To add to this, there are differing opinions on the true nature of this substance and its effects on human health. The issue remains today a subject of ongoing research and debate among scholars, historians, and scientists. And though this is both a very interesting but also very tragic part of history, you might be wondering to yourself, what does this have to do with the 2012 Radiolab's podcast? Well, this controversy would occur because one of its hosts, Robert Krulwich, would go on air with Yang and his niece Cao Kaliyang, both of Hmong blood. And Robert would press them repeatedly about whether this yellow rain was a poison or whether it was bee droppings, which was what he seemed to have believed. After the interview, Cao Kaliyang said that though she thought that Radiolabs was interested in the Hmong story, that they were interested in documenting the deaths that happened, there was so much that was not told on the podcast. The people who were critical of this podcast episode said that it was seen through the lens of a very one-sided perspective, and that it ignored the Hmong people who were heavily affected by it, making it seem potentially culturally insensitive. In response, Krulwich is stated as saying, "This interview troubled us. Her desire was to monopolise the story, and that we can't allow." And just like how there's no conclusive answers for the origins of yellow rain, a similar thing can be said for our next case. Michael Shermer's appearance on the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe is the next podcast we're going to focus on. But unlike what we've already spoken about, the controversy here doesn't come in the forms of lies or denial. The controversy comes in Michael Shermer himself, because he featured on the podcast in December of 2015, after he had previously been alleged of sexual harassment and assault. So let me fill you in on a bit of Shermer's background and history before we get into these allegations. Born in 1954, Shermer is a science writer and also the founder of the Skeptic Society, which is described as an organisation devoted to promoting scientific skepticism and challenging irrational beliefs. He therefore seems like a good candidate to have on a show called The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, and he actually appeared there first back in 2006. This interview, as far as I can tell, was all fine. But going on a decade later though, he returned for a second appearance. But this time it was met with much more backlash. And this is because, in the time since his first appearance, he had been alleged to have sexually harassed and assaulted numerous women. These allegations had first come out in 2013 and 2014, a good year or two before his second appearance on the show in December 2015. These allegations weren't nearly as publicised back then as they have been more recently, but there's a very good chance that the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe would have known about them. Even if they did though, these are just allegations, and in the decade since they first appeared, it's to my knowledge that nothing has ever come out of it. In the time since, Shermer has remained adamant that he didn't do anything that he was accused of, even going as far as sending cease and desist letters to the student-run newspaper of Santa Barbara City College and accusing the editor of defamation. In this 2015 podcast, Shermer and the hosts engaged in thought-provoking, intelligent conversation. What they were saying for the most part wasn't the subject of controversy, but it was the fact that Shermer hadn't been cleared of his allegations, which upset many. The question is, should someone be completely blacklisted for these sorts of alleged crimes? If Shermer is in fact innocent, it obviously wouldn't be fair. If he's guilty, of course platforms would very likely not want to associate with him. But though Shermer's case is filled with doubt, mystery, and an open ending, the same thing can't exactly be said for Shane Gillis. He's a man who's been described as a sketch writer, a radio personality, stand-up comedian, and podcaster. But it would be the last of those titles which would cost him the chance of a lifetime, as he was added to the cast of Saturday Night Live prior to its 45th season. His time there would not last long though, because right after his hiring, he was immediately cancelled for some things he had previously said on his podcast. It was only a 2-minute clip on the internet, but these 2 minutes would take it all away from him. Gillis was on his podcast with Matt McCusker, called Matt and Shane's Secret Podcast. But this secret would soon be revealed when, after he was announced to be one of the new additions to the SNL cast, people would take it upon themselves to do a background check on him. Which was when someone found a clip of Shane and Matt talking about Chinatown and essentially just dunking on it. Apparently, there were also instances of him making offensive jokes aimed at women and members of the LGBT community, apparently using a homophobic slur in reference to Judd Apatow and comedian Chris Gethard. However, it really was the Chinatown remarks that were the catalyst to his eventual termination before he even made a single appearance on the show. Shane Gillis wouldn't really defend himself though. He said on Joe Rogan that he understood why some people were upset, but would also say elsewhere that he was a comedian and it's a comedian's job to go up and push boundaries and to go up to the line. Though he got it wrong a few times and crossed that line. All forms of comedy are based on some sort of misery, so if someone isn't offended, is a joke actually funny? This raised a larger debate, with many people saying that though Gillis had done something a bit out of line, he is a human after all, and humans make mistakes. Many people criticised SNL for giving him the boot immediately, saying that he deserved a chance to go out and give an apology and try to make amends. Others, however, said, "That's it, you're over before you've started." Gillis made the point that not only was he one of the first people to be properly cancelled, but that he also wasn't exactly famous at the time. He was just immediately rejected by cancel culture, and so ended his chances on SNL. But as I mentioned, Gillis was able to talk about his cancellation on the Joe Rogan podcast, and I think that's a good segue into our next case, because the Joe Rogan podcast is so famous. It has to be the most popular podcast of the past 5 years at least, right? Maybe of all time. His podcast has made almost 2,000 episodes, and so of course there's going to be some controversy hidden among that, especially when it comes to Joe Rogan, who is not afraid of a bit of controversy. The Joe Rogan podcast has so much content in it that if you were to watch it the entire way through with no breaks or anything, it would take you 7 months. So of course there's going to be some skeletons in the closet to take a look at. Gillis was just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Joe Rogan's guests, so let's talk a bit about the more controversial ones. Heralded as a voice for the voiceless by some, and demonized as giving a platform to people that shouldn't have one by others, Joe Rogan doesn't seem to care an incredible amount for the baggage that some of his guests might have. The most obvious of these might just be Alex Jones, a man who I've spoken at least once or twice about now in my videos. Just in case you don't know him, he's one of the most controversial, far right-wing pundits in the world. His show InfoWars is highly popular, but that might only be because many people tune in to see what kind of crazy things that Jones will say next. He's an avid conspiracy theorist, claiming that big businesses and governments are creating a new world order, and he's had some choice words to say about tragedies such as Sandy Hook, the Oklahoma bombing, and 9/11. And so when he was invited on the podcast, a lot of people had an issue with what he might potentially say, and they criticised Rogan for giving him a platform to potentially spread his agenda. Rogan, however, has always stayed by the belief that it's important for him to show a diversity of perspectives from the left, the right, and the centre. And so he's left himself open to criticism by some who think that people with certain viewpoints shouldn't have the right to defend themselves. In particular, some people have taken note that Alex Jones isn't the only more controversial right-leaning figure to have featured on the Joe Rogan Experience, as others such as Ben Shapiro, Milo Yiannopoulos, Elon Musk, Steven Crowder, and Jordan Peterson, each of varying levels of controversy, have all also appeared on it. Rogan has also interviewed a man named Sam Harris, who I'm sure a handful of you guys are familiar with, but for the majority who don't know who this man is, he's been described as a philosopher, neuroscientist, author, and podcast host. And it's actually his podcast that I want to talk about next, because in May 2017, he interviewed a man named Charles A. Murray, a now 80-year-old political scientist whose views and theories seem to many people as horrendously out of date. And it was on Sam Harris's podcast that the two of them would discuss the correlation between race and IQ. Oh yeah, I'm sure that this one is particularly sensitive to a lot of people, and I'm sure that a lot of people are just outraged that this was even a conversation that had to be discussed, let alone it was discussed like 5 or 6 years ago, but it was. So Sam Harris is running an irregularly scheduled podcast called Waking Up. This podcast is incredibly successful, all things considered, and back when this happened, it was the 5th most downloaded podcast in the iTunes Science and Medicine category. This is when he invites Charles Murray on, who previously co-authored The Bell Curve with Richard Jane Herrnstein back in 1994, in which they argued that a person's intelligence is largely determined by their genetics. They also argue that someone's intelligence will have a major impact on their socio-economic status, and that this is the main reason that there's income inequality throughout the United States, because it's a melting pot, and therefore the demographics of people that are traditionally earning more have some sort of a genetic advantage compared to demographics of people that traditionally don't earn as much. Of course, without trying to tiptoe around it, a large part of this theory is based on ethnicity. And it claims that disparities, when it comes down to how different races and ethnicities perform on IQ tests, are down to genetic factors. This theory has been widely criticised and discredited by mainstream scientists, but nonetheless it has had an impact on how race and intelligence have been discussed, especially in the United States. Now, to have one of the people who authored this book on your podcast is, in many people's eyes, unforgivable. But some people would say that it might be alright to invite him on if you're going to debate him on some of his highly controversial viewpoints. Sam Harris, however, did not do that. Some other people might say that it would be alright to have him on if he came out and said that his theories were incorrect, or maybe there might have been some factors that he hadn't considered before, but Murray didn't do that. He said his opinions haven't changed on the matter, and if anything, they've actually grown stronger since he published the book. In this podcast episode, Harris was described as passively following Murray into the dangerous and unwanted conclusion that Hispanic and African American people are genetically disposed to having lower IQ scores compared to white and Asian people. I think this is a prime example of the cancelable world of podcasts, because to many people hearing this, it just comes off as awfully out of date and frankly, racist. But from a much older debate to a much more current one, I think that everyone can agree that the way in which we've spoken about gender and sexuality has shifted so much in a single generation, hell, in even a decade. But it's also become perhaps the largest source of contention in identity politics. And that's why just a week or two ago, as of me recording this video, it shocked the world when Jeffree Star came out on a podcast and lambasted they/them pronouns. Yeah, if you're not aware of this story, it came as a huge surprise to just about everyone. Because, I mean, just look at him. I don't want to come across as the assuming type, but I think if you take a look at the way he presents himself, it's typically more in line with people that would use, or at the very least accept or promote, they/them pronouns. But alas, Jeffree Star is not one of these people. And in fact, he thinks that people using these pronouns is, quote, stupid. The context here is that Jeffree Star appeared on the Barstool Sports podcast Bussin' with the Boys, and that's when he said he didn't care for they/them, saying that you can be trans but you're male or female. He said that conservatives like him for it, and that he's in a position where he can call this kind of thing out because he won't get called homophobic or transphobic for it. Now, of course, this caused a huge divide in reaction. Many of the comments that I found on YouTube were declaring Star a voice of reason, but a lot of the posts that I found on Twitter were saying that they no longer liked Jeffree Star. However, it would be a disservice not to mention that to many people, this seemed as a bit of a U-turn for Star. And this is because a few years ago, when asked by Shane Dawson, Star said that he takes any pronouns, not explicitly saying they, but you would think that he would say both pronouns if he was just referring to male and female. That being said, firstly, he also referred to himself as being an alien in this clip, so I can't assume that he was taking it too seriously. And secondly, sometimes people's positions just change, so perhaps there's been something over the past few years that has changed his opinion on they/them pronouns. Nonetheless, though he's been far from cancelled over this controversy, many people that used to look up to him, or believed that he had the same values as them, have been given the sobering knowledge that this is perhaps not the case. But of course, this video isn't just controversial themes, people and slurs. Sometimes there are issues when the cameras are off and the microphones are muted that are the most interesting. And one of the most high profile of these cases was that of the Call Her Daddy podcast. It's been described as a success story by some and a cautionary tale by others. But I would say that it's a bit of both. This entire tale is underpinned by a friendship turned sour and an irreparable rift between two former besties. So to understand this case, let me fill you in on a bit of the background. Call Her Daddy is a sex and relationships focused podcast created by Sophia Franklin and Alexandra Cooper in 2018, and it was known at the time for being quite distinct because it was tackling taboos, especially when it comes to women in the dating scene and the bedroom. From how to survive a breakup to how to give the Gluck Gluck 9000, everything was on the cards. The stories shared were framed to be approachable, funny, and upbeat for the most part, and it led to the podcast becoming immensely popular in the 2 years between 2018 and 2020. After just 4 episodes, it was discovered by Dave Portnoy of Barstool Sports, who took on the podcast, and this lit a flame beneath it. In literally 2 months, Call Her Daddy went from 12,000 downloads to 2 million. Alex and Sophia went global almost overnight and forever changed the podcasting game. People seemed to gravitate towards the podcast as many found that women and girls didn't have much of a place to hear these kind of candid and honest conversations. However, as well as this might have appeared on the outside, something much more troublesome was brewing beneath the surface. You see, when Call Her Daddy signed up with Barstool Sports in 2018, the digital media company agreed to pay the hosts a salary of $75,000. This was to be supplemented with bonuses by podcast performance and a portion of merchandise sales up until their contract's completion in 2021. In 2020, however, after their success, the co-hosts thought that they weren't getting their fair share. And even with their bonuses, it's hard to argue that they were wrong. Then enters a bloke known as Suitman into the Thunderdome. Suitman was Sophia's boyfriend and was a former executive at HBO Sports. He said that they were getting absolutely screwed and pushed for this mega $1 million contract which included owning the Call Me Daddy IP. To which Barstool Sports replied, no. Long story short, they failed to agree a new contract and so the show was put on hold. Both of these women had offers from various other media companies, but for as much as they had seemingly been on the same page before, cracks in their relationship would soon begin to show. According to Sophia Franklin, Cooper was seeking more than a 50-50 control of the podcast, and this was a problem for Franklin because they had always been an equal partnership. But in actuality, Cooper had been earning more than Franklin for a short time, because Portnoy had given her a raise behind Franklin's back and she didn't know about this. Apparently Cooper just brought more to the table, and she'd been editing episodes herself and just generally doing more for the brand than Franklin. But the real source of tension came to what the two of them wanted out of their new deals. Barstool Sports came back with a counteroffer, raising their salaries to $500,000 each, giving them a larger percentage of merch sales and giving them 100% of the Call Her Daddy IP. Franklin, though, was apparently not behind the new contract that was written for them, and this was criticised by Cooper, who thought that Franklin would never be on board with the number that Barstool Sports put forward. And so we're left in a situation where Alex wants to stay with Barstool Sports and take the new contract, but Sophia wants out. This riff would conclude with a parting between the two women, the two former roommates, and now the two former co-hosts. Franklin would leave Call Her Daddy, but Cooper would stay on as now the sole host. And so, starting in May 2020, Alex Cooper would go on alone. Sophia Franklin would later create a podcast called Sophia with an F. But Cooper, now owning the Call Her Daddy IP, would later sign a $60 million deal with Spotify for it to exclusively represent her podcast. And so Cooper swam with the sharks and lived to tell the tale. It was quite the tragic ending for Sophia though, who wasn't in on this deal. And so in a comparison between the two women, it's easy to see who made the right choice. It was on the 19th of August 2020 when famous actress and singer Bella Thorne joined the adult subscription service OnlyFans. Though when the news broke to the public, there was a large outcry attacking the then 22-year-old who had gained over 50,000 followers in her first week. This earned her an estimated $2 million after OnlyFans' 20% cut. A high takeaway for sure, but many people thought that this was blood money. You see, what the former Disney Channel star failed to keep in mind was that to many of the people who created content for the service, it was a very delicate ecosystem. And when a famous celebrity such as Thorne joined the site, they claimed that it disrupted the market. Many made the point that she didn't exactly need the estimated $2 million a month that doing this would afford her, and those 50,000 followers could have better spread out that $2 million to other creators that could have used the money more. Which, speaking of those 50,000 followers, they weren't too happy either, as they had spent their money believing that they would get the full Monty, if you know what I mean. Shout out to the people who have seen that movie. But when they found out that the content that they would get was instead lewd lingerie photos and not the full deal, they wanted refunds. With all of these having to be given, game processing costs and time wasted for the service, and so OnlyFans actually came in with some reforms following this. I'm not an OnlyFans expert in the slightest, but I believe that you can now only charge $50 for exclusive content, and tips are capped at $100. This disheartened many creators because these issues now came at an expense to them by a celebrity who many of them think didn't really understand the struggle or the culture around sex work. Many workers also claimed that their paychecks have been delayed as a result of this. OnlyFans claimed that these caps were not in response to Bella Thorne and they had actually been in the pipeline for a while, but the timing was very coincidental. Of course, many people did back Bella Thorne, saying that she was well within her rights to use this service, but Bella Thorne came out with a response that was rather strange. She responded by saying that she was actually making a movie directed by Sean Baker that revolved around this subject matter, and that she was intending to donate a portion of the money that she had generated to charity. However, Sean Baker, the person that was allegedly going to direct this thing, adamantly denied that any such collaboration would take place, and 2 years later, it still hasn't. To this day, it's to my belief that Bella Thorne is still on the service, and the heat has obviously since reduced. I'd be interested to hear what you guys think about this one. Do you think that we should be gatekeeping who's allowed on OnlyFans or not? Bella Thorne claimed that she wanted to destigmatize sex work, but when you're charging $200 for some of your services, there's clearly a financial incentive for someone who's already worth like $10 million. And this apparently had a negative impact for some of the other workers, but at the same time, hey, she should be allowed to if she wants to, right? So I don't know, let me know what you think down in the comments. So that's just one of the many stories I have for you in this video, where we're going to be talking about everybody's favorite subscription service. Let me clarify, because this is important. This video is not meant to slander the people who work on the platform, nor is it meant to defend them. Whether this kind of thing is poison for society or liberation for sex workers, I'm not focused on that. What I will be focused on though is exposing the dark realities that reside within the platform, because there are some interesting cases. And I think you guys are going to come out of this video having learnt a lot about it, so with that said, let's just get into it. Let's go. Now, speaking of Bella Thorne upsetting the OnlyFans ecosystem, I want to take a moment now to talk about the ecosystem itself. I don't really know if I call this one as much of a controversy or a scandal as I would a reality check. So this was a study conducted on OnlyFans a short while ago. It was conducted in April 2020, and I think it's about high time that I throw out some audience participation to you. So here's a question. How much money do you think that the average person who creates content on OnlyFans will make in 1 month? Let me know down in the comments, and if you're correct, I'll give you the Ds to my channel. Pause the video right now if you want to play along, because I'm about to tell you the answer is $180 a month. I was personally quite surprised when I found this out, because that's not enough for rent. That's nowhere near enough so you could quit your job and go full time with it. Now again, I'm not having a go here. If you think this is the right choice for you, nobody should stop you from doing it, provided everything's legal and considered. But if you're the average creator here, $180 is all you'll make. I'm just going to let this part of the video play out with the facts that have been presented to me and subsequently to you. This study found that the top 1% of accounts generate 33% of the platform's revenue. The top 10% of creators account for 73% of the platform's revenue, and based off the study, some people might actually lose money when doing it. These are the cold hard facts, like them or not, so unless you're in that top 10% or so, you might find that it's not economically viable to do it full time. Especially because even within the bottom 50%, as you can see on this graph, getting more than $100 a month is slightly uncommon. It goes on to say that to break even on OnlyFans, creators need to earn more per month than the cost of hours spent engaging. The median take-home revenue is $136 a month, and so if you value a creator's time at say $15 an hour, the median creator needs to be spending less than 9 hours a month on OnlyFans to break even. There might be a bit of hope, however, as this data does not take tipping into account because the information has never been released to the public. So hypothetically, you could be a person with extremely loyal followers that tip generously and still make a living wage. Admittedly, this is unlikely, so although OnlyFans can spell freedom and liberation to some, especially if you're in that top 10% where some serious money can be made, well, if you're just the average creator, it's probably best not to quit your day job just yet, especially because the life of an OnlyFans creator can be very, very unstable. Speaking of which, let's take things back a little over a year now to August of 2021, when it was revealed that there would be a ban on suggestive or explicit content being uploaded to the site. Now, major criticism was levied against it because if you know one thing about the platform, it's that suggestive and explicit content is kind of what it's known for, right? But it seems that at least for a moment there, the higher ups or maybe some investors wanted a change. Originally, OnlyFans seemed like the perfect place for this kind of stuff because it had a slick interface and a loose content policy. And so many people went over there to try and use it to make money, but upon hearing the news, well, it was a worry for a lot of people. The CEO, Tim Stokely, would come out and say, "The change in policy, we had no choice. The short answer is banks," which seems to allude to a financial incentive rather than a genuine want of change in direction. Stokely would name 3 banks that refused service with OnlyFans because of the content on the platform, those being the Bank of New York Mellon, Metro Bank, and JP Morgan Chase. Stokely's service was not the first platform to have a crackdown on sexual content, and surely it will not be the last. However, after some backlash, they gave it a second thought and reconsidered their actions. If people didn't know about the platform before, they certainly would know about it now, because this news was covered all over the internet. The deal was that OnlyFans was realistically solely an adult service. Yes, some people did cooking on there or small little bits and bobs like that, but realistically everyone knows that the adult content is the most common thing up there. There's a chance that Stokely realised that it's probably better to have a platform that's not allowed to use a few banks than a platform that's about to lose 95% of its user base. So in the end, a reverse in fact did come to a sigh of relief for the platform's creators. Now, these creators were able to keep their jobs, but many in the same field aren't as lucky. For example, an individual known online as Chloe, who in real life was an Arizonan science teacher, or perhaps former science teacher, because it was reported a few months back that she was going to be given a sack after filming some of her videos for the platform inside her own classroom. She was filming these videos with her husband, but both of her employed professions would soon cut ties with the woman as she was fired from her teaching job and banned from OnlyFans. You might be wondering, just how was she caught? And the answer was that she was actually promoting her content on Instagram and TikTok, each of which are obviously accessible to the public. A number of her students must have been following her on at least one of these social media platforms though, as they got a taste of the content that she was providing, noticing that their desks featured as props in this particular movie, and not long after, the story spread like wildfire and Mrs. Pia was relieved from her position as a schoolteacher. She claimed that she was only doing it to support her family, but this argument was of no use, as once the news broke publicly, her OnlyFans account was taken away from her and the people that subscribed to her were refunded. The reason that they took her account away is still technically unconfirmed, though it's heavily theorized that it's because she filmed in the classroom. You see, the platform has an acceptable use policy which clearly states that users should not record in or broadcast from a public space when members of the public are reasonably likely to see the activities being performed. Obviously, by filming this content where she did, she was breaching this. She's since come out with an apology video which has been subject to tremendous amounts of backlash. She claims that she's a human and humans make mistakes and all the rest, but the comments of this video were just not buying it. I've also heard this wild story that she has a revenge plan put in place for her former friend who snitched on her. I assume that her former friend had probably a son who saw Chloe Carter's OnlyFans and then told his mother about it, and then from there his mother told the rest of the parents. Apparently, her former friend, now turned enemy, has a food truck that isn't doing too well financially, and so Chloe Carter plans on buying this food truck and then shooting an OnlyFans video in the food truck. What? I mean, I guess everyone knows that revenge is a dish best served hot and steamy. Carter has since moved on to Fansly, where she is currently active. By the way, I should put a little disclaimer for that past story and some of the others that we're about to get into. Please do not attack any of the people that I feature in this video. Even if it's tempting, even if some of these people definitely went over the line, can we please show some restraint? But with that out of the way, let's move on to a somewhat similar case. From land to sea, we're turning our attention now to the British Royal Navy to talk about a creator known as Callie, who is apparently creating OnlyFans content on board a top secret nuclear base. This news broke to the British media in early February of 2021, and the story goes that she, as well as her lover who is in the same profession, filmed their content in the Faslane nuclear submarine headquarters, which is reported to be located near Glasgow. When this was discovered, a Navy source is quoted as saying, "The commanders can't believe it. There could be all kinds of security risks involved." What was even more astounding was that to get to the top level of security clearance where she was at, she would have previously been vetted. It's claimed that she would have been grilled about her intimate life as part of procedure. This wouldn't stop her though from using the £1 billion vessel that she was stationed in as the location for a number of her videos. When confronted with the accusations, she immediately confessed that yes, this was what she had been doing. Her bosses were extremely concerned that if the wrong hands got a hold of this content, it could have been used as the subject of blackmail, thus could have been a security breach. Fortunately, the war in Ukraine hadn't started yet, and I've been told by a top secret, totally real source that Putin didn't get his grubby little hands on this stuff. Though he might have got his hands on a second creator's content, because right after this news story broke, it was revealed that another member of the Royal Navy was creating OnlyFans content. Known only as Izzy, it was reported that her face was never revealed, but she did at one point pose for a photo draped on top of a Royal Navy flag. So it's thought that the original case was not an isolated incident, and perhaps these workers were aware of each other. However, compared to our last case with Chloe Carter, not too much is known about these incidents because, as comes with the territory, the Royal Navy will probably want to keep this hush. They don't want to reveal too much information. Especially because at least one of these women were working aboard a top secret nuclear submarine. And so, at least for now, these stories have come to a close. On the topic of someone who got in huge trouble for their OnlyFans, let's talk about Katie Price, who only a few months ago risked arrest after shooting a saucy video in Thailand. If you don't know who Katie Price is, she used to be very big in the modelling world, frequently appearing on page 3 of The Sun. Let me tell you that The Sun is by far and away the worst British newspaper, and page 3 is traditionally reserved for a fully naked model. It was the kind of thing that people got off to before OnlyFans existed, probably the most sexist thing I've ever seen in my life, but it just made sense that when something like OnlyFans did come into existence, Katie Price would move there. She also went on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, a British reality/game show, and then she married Peter Andre, best known for his song Mysterious Girl. She's definitely lived quite the life, but she would risk it all when she announced that she was going to be shooting an OnlyFans video in Thailand, which apparently has some very strict rules when it comes to this kind of stuff. Apparently, tourists do quite often get arrested in the country and sometimes face long jail time if put behind bars. In the case of Katie, she had apparently gone topless in the country on a beach years prior, back in 2018, and apparently this is illegal. But I couldn't verify my source, so please do take it with a grain of salt. For this kind of video that Katie Price wanted to make though, I could verify that the trade, importation, production, or distribution of this particular type of video could be faced with up to 3 years in prison or the equivalent of a £2,000 fine. This news story broke a few months ago now, but it's to my belief that Katie Price is not behind bars unless she's making her OnlyFans content inside a Thai prison cell. So despite the controversy with Thai laws, anything more serious has fortunately been avoided. On the topic of breaking laws, let's turn our attention to a British woman known on OnlyFans as Billy Louise, who in May of last year was found flashing drivers on the motorway. The 27-year-old was filmed on top of a bridge in Kent, lifting up her top and exposing her upper half to motorists, many of which complained that this made it especially difficult to focus on the road. Billy, on the other hand, would take pride in her actions, tweeting out later that day,
"I had fun today on the bridge and I think the lorry drivers liked it."
Thankfully, no crashes were reported due to this incident, but after this news went public, the general populace had some criticism to air, arguing that if it was a man flashing, the story would be different. This was technically indecent exposure, self-promotion or not. Of course, not everyone was critical of Billy though. After looking her up for research purposes, I found this tweet from Redneck Token who said, "As an American lorry driver, I'd like to say thank you for your service." And Andy FR Mumlet who said, "Holy moly, those are perfect." So Billy Louise's followers clearly didn't mind, and Louise herself actually came out to defend her actions. She says that she pays council tax to children on benefits, and, you know, she makes the lorry drivers' days just that little bit better, so no harm, no foul. Reports stated that she could have faced upwards of 2 years behind bars if found guilty, though based on her Instagram having been active last week, this hasn't happened, and since it didn't cause a crash, it would be hard to justify such a lengthy sentence. She has reaped the rewards of this stunt though, having exploded in popularity like many of the other women that we've spoken about today. And so in a video where so many of these women are losing their jobs, I would say that Billy Louise walked away with a win here. The same, however, could not be said about a Californian mother whose children were expelled from their Catholic school after the board found her OnlyFans page. This story dates back to 2021 with a woman known as Miss Poindexter. She claims that after her page was discovered, it was only 24 hours later that she found out that her children would not be allowed back in school, so they weren't even allowed back in to say goodbye to their friends or pick up their belongings. Miss Poindexter, who reportedly earned $150,000 a month from her profile, began the page after wanting to spice things up in her romantic life with her husband. But after rising through the platform's rankings, it would come at the cost of her 3 children being banished from their school. She allegedly received an email from the school which read, "Your apparent quest for high-profile controversy in support of your adult website is in direct conflict with what we hope to impart to our students. We therefore require that you find another school for your children and have no further association with ours." This all started after a parent of one of the students at the school found her page, and shortly after a campaign was launched against her, which would eventually get its wishes. It's been reported that the dads at the school knew about her page a lot longer than the mums did, which makes sense. According to a highly reputable source, the Lad Bible, one of these dads broke man code, and then the secret became public knowledge. He was definitely caught checking out the page by his wife. That is absolutely what happened. The school board has declined to comment on the matter, but Mrs. Poindexter has since said that she wished to enroll her students in another Catholic school, but was worried that because of her line of work, she might get blacklisted. Though, if you're worried for Mrs. Poindexter, there was a silver lining to this story, which was that this only proved to bolster her online presence. So despite the expulsion, there were some positives for her family. Though education boards are not the only groups that would blacklist those they disagree with. Did you know that last year, OnlyFans was accused of blacklisting their enemies? So this story is set in February of 2022, when it was reported on several highly reputable news sources, including the BBC, that OnlyFans was accused of conspiring to blacklist their rivals. The article wrote, "Legal documents previously unreported claim OnlyFans directed an unidentified social media company to disable accounts of performers by placing their content on a terrorism database." So there is a lot to unpack here. First of all, you must be wondering, who was this unidentified social media company? As it turns out, it was old man Meta, and it would have gotten away with it too if it weren't for you meddling whistleblowers. Allegedly. So Meta reportedly put 20,000 adult content creators on a terrorism database, which is just mad. Straight up, that is bonkers. This news broke because OnlyFans was being sued by another adult content service, FanCentro, in response to it being found out. So clearly someone believes that this story, as wild as it is in fact true. This lawsuit alleges that the bribes were paid by OnlyFans back in 2018. The Independent wrote, "OnlyFans highlighted their profiles to Meta, who then allegedly submitted their names into a database managed by the Global Internet Forum to Counter Terrorism known as the GIFCT. Now, the GIFCT is used by a number of the largest social media brands like Facebook, Snapchat, and YouTube, as it alerts them to potentially harmful content that's being spread so that these guys can make sure that it's never seen by people. But if these allegations are true, if they could have been corrupted by OnlyFans as to shadow ban rival adult content creators, well, that is indeed a scary thought. For a long time now, adult content creators have voiced their annoyance at their accounts being blocked and banned from different social media sites to different levels of validity. I mean, each social media platform is going to have a terms of service box that tells you exactly what is or isn't allowed on there, and a lot of the time, the kind of content that they wish to upload simply isn't allowed. But if we're saying that these adult creators are being blacklisted even when their content is fit within the rules, well then that's a different story, isn't it? He thought that he had won, but one rap later and his life as he knew it was over. It was in October of 2020 that news outlets reported a story surrounding SoundCloud rapper Nuke Bizzle in a tale as morally questionable as it was actually quite funny. But to understand why, we need to go back to the start. Nuke Bizzle, real name Fontrell Antonio Barnes, was a then 31-year-old rapper who had come up with a bit of a scheme. A fraudulent plan that allowed him to steal $1.2 million. He did this by exploiting the pandemic's unemployment assistance provision of the CARES Act, which was designed to expand access to unemployment benefits to the self-employed and gig workers. Essentially, if you guys remember back to 2020, the US government wanted to assist people who were out of work, and so they sent over money to those whose jobs were impacted because of the pandemic. Nuke Bizzle realized that if he could apply to the California Employment Development Department under fake names and stolen identities, he could then claim their benefits. And so he and a few co-conspirators did exactly that. He used fake names, many of which belonged to people who had been the victim of identity theft, in order to apply for EDD debit cards, and then he had the cards sent to addresses in which he had access to within Beverly Hills and Koreatown. So how many times do you guys think he did this successfully? How many EDD debit cards do you think that Nuke Bizzle obtained? Let me know your answer down in the comments, because the actual truth is pretty wild. Let me know down below, because I can now tell you that Nuke Bizzle had access to 92 EDD debit cards that were worth, yet again, $1.2 million, and even though he only ever accessed about $700,000 of this, I mean, it was still a huge takeaway. He was able to defraud the government out of more than $1 million, and he very nearly got away with it too. Nuke Bizzle was on top of the world. There are multiple pictures of him online wearing designer clothes, Gucci belts, seemingly expensive jewelry, holding large sums of cash. And it was at this point, after Nuke Bizzle and everyone else involved had ran the scheme successfully almost 100 times, that it's likely that Nuke Bizzle got a bit cocky. He thought that he had outsmarted everyone, and so in a hilariously unfortunate series of events for him, Nuke Bizzle decided to include how he defrauded the government into his SoundCloud raps. He made a song literally called EDD, once again referring to the Employment Development Department, and in this song, which also has a music video attached to it, he brags about getting rich off EDD. Quote, "I just got rich off EDD, I just woke up to 300 Gs. He'd also give a shout out to then President Donald Trump, while another rapper in the video named Fat Wizzer went on to rap, "You gotta sell cocaine, I just file a claim." And then he ended his verse with, "N, I'm smart, you ain't." Nuke Bizzle was then arrested in Las Vegas 13 days after the song dropped, at which time he had 8 EDD debit cards on his person. Strangely enough, CNN reported that roughly $163 billion of the $872 billion given out during the pandemic was fraudulently given, and so Nuke Bizzle was definitely not alone, but because he snitched on himself during his rap, he was caught and in response was sentenced to 77 months in prison, which is equivalent to more than 6 years behind bars. And of course, he was also made to pay the money back. And that's just one of the many stories I have for you today about SoundCloud's shameless criminal rappers. Still to come, we have a story about a kid who was accused of wanting to harm his school because of his rap lyrics, and a man who made a SoundCloud rap years before he was accused of a quadruple murder in one of the most infamous US true crime cases of the past decade. But to get to those stories, we have to go through this next one. So, as it turns out, Nuke Bizzle wasn't the only SoundCloud rapper to get in trouble during the pandemic. In fact, a rapper named James Potok also found himself flying a bit too close to the sun. James Potok, if you don't know him, was a SoundCloud rapper and prankster who a couple of years ago now was deemed a criminal for saying that he had coronavirus when actually he didn't. What's up with that? Now obviously, there's a bit more to this story than I said. For some context, James Potok was on board a plane to Jamaica to film a rap music video when he claimed to have the coronavirus. Obviously, a plane is a very crammed area, so there's no getting away from someone who's sick if they're within your vicinity. You can't just leave. He thought that it would be funny to say that and take a video of it, and perhaps he thought that the video would go viral. He said, "Can I get everybody's attention please? I just came back from the Hunan province, the capital of the coronavirus. I'm not feeling too well." But though James had anticipated that people would freak out, though he had anticipated that this would be the source of fear, he could have never anticipated that the plane that was flying to Jamaica would turn back around and head back to Toronto, where he's from. He could have never anticipated the plane making an emergency landing, and of course he didn't also expect the crew to then notify the police who would be there to arrest him when he got off the plane, being escorted off in a mask whilst angry passengers booed the man who ruined their flight. He tried to use the virus to go viral, but ended up walking away in cuffs. Although through a modern lens, it seems a bit ridiculous that they would turn the plane around and go back home where he would be arrested. If you remember that this is set in early 2020, it is a bit more understandable. Back then, we really didn't know how COVID worked. Mass hysteria was rampant, people were running around in hazmat suits, the media was sticking cameras in dying 40-year-olds' faces, telling them to warn the public. In hindsight, whether or not they should have been as much as they were, that's up for debate, but at least when you take the time into context, it's more understandable that the plane passengers would be a bit terrified when they hear that a man who's been to China is now feeling extremely sick. Following this, Potok would make an apology to YouTube in a video that has since been deleted, since if I'm not mistaken, he has deleted his channel. Though if you're looking for it, you can easily find a re-upload. It actually seems as though Potok went silent online after this, as though I found in an article that he allegedly had 30,000 Instagram followers at the time, I couldn't find his Instagram either. His Twitter also dried up in October 2020, a few months after the incident. Now, this could be down to the negative reaction that this prank had, or potentially it could be because he went to court because of the prank, and perhaps part of his sentencing came with the fact that he had to stay offline for a year or two and he just never came back. I could realistically see that as a possibility, though that is just a theory of mine. In fact, after the initial news coverage back in February 2020, I couldn't find anything online about the repercussions he faced. Though I can't imagine it was anything too severe. Anything more than a fine and a slap on the wrist and perhaps an apology seems a bit excessive in my books. But since there are a few details on the matter, anything else I say would be nothing more than speculation. But speaking of speculation, much was given over Michael Schmidt's intentions back in 2018. The reason being? Well, many people speculated that this SoundCloud rapper had intentions of shooting up his school. The story goes that it was a crisp day in February when Schmidt decided to write a new rap for SoundCloud. He wanted to express himself creatively with a song titled, "You lil sluts at JCHS, I love you all even though y'all hurt me and I forgive you, I would never hurt you." JCHS, by the way, was a reference to his school, the James Caldwell High School. He wrote all of the lyrics, many of which were very crass and aggressive, but nonetheless he released the song into the ether. But what would happen next would change Michael Schmidt's life forever, as a student at the high school discovered the song and believed their life to potentially be in danger. They reported it to the school, who took immediate action, locking the premises down, and I kid you not, they contacted the authorities, who took the rap so seriously as to send the SWAT team out to tackle the situation. Fortunately, school wasn't on at that time, and though there were a few people on campus, it wasn't like the SWAT team just burst through the windows during science class or anything. But since the incident, both the school and Schmidt have come out to defend their positions. On the side of the school, it's understandable that if there's the slightest fear that Schmidt could potentially be a threat, that the most immediate action should be taken. At the end of the day, safety comes first. We've seen online hints that should have been listened to over and over and over and over again over the past decade, but even before that, though these sorts of shootings have still persisted. And since this incident came just days after a school shooting in Parkland, Florida, which could have been prevented if people would have taken the assailant's social media post seriously, there's no doubt that for the safety of students and faculty alike, it's better to be safe than sorry in these situations. However, from Schmidt's side, what if they were looking into something that wasn't there? Schmidt was arrested for creating a false public alarm, which reportedly could come along with a 5 to 10 year prison sentence. Let me remind you that all he actually did was create a rap song. To potentially be put behind bars for 5 to 10 years of your life for simply expressing yourself creatively is dystopian and insane. And the lyrics, by the way, weren't anything that we haven't heard before. Apparently he just says "suck my dick" a few times and makes physical violent threats, which isn't exactly new. Apparently one line went, "pull my gun, kill your f***ing head, now you're dead, go to sleep." I mean, they're pretty dead lyrics if you ask me. There's no subtlety, there's no wordplay, there's no nuance, but his lyricism isn't on trial here. At the end of the day, they're just words in a rap song, and so if there's no intention behind them, then it shouldn't even matter. But the only person who knew if there was intention is Schmidt himself, and his case definitely isn't helped by the fact that his SoundCloud profile picture is him posing with a gun pointed towards the camera. He would later lie to the police, saying that the gun in the picture was plastic and he attempted to not give it over to them. However, later inspection found that the gun was in fact real. Being a Brit myself, American gun culture has always been something that somewhat eluded me. Obviously, I know that if you own one, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to go and use it for evil intentions. But taking photos with guns like this seems very threatening, and I can understand if students at his school were scared. On top of that, dropping your school's name in a rap featuring violent lyrics is strange, and Schmidt himself was not a perfect student. In the 2 years between 2016 and 2018, it was reported that he had been suspended 10 times minimum, ranging from tamer reasons such as cutting class, to more severe incidents such as spitting on classmates and having THC in his system. Additionally, his school's resource officer claimed that in the past, Schmidt had expressed anger towards his school, but wouldn't you too if you had been suspended 10 times? Does that necessarily mean that he had cruel intentions? Schmidt argued that because he's from a small white conservative town in New Jersey, him being a weird kid who's a fan of hip hop made them associate him with a stereotypical view of gangster rappers. He said, "It was like I was guilty the second I posted the song on SoundCloud. They wouldn't let me explain myself." When it comes to rap music, a lot of people associate it with violence, with murder, with vulgarity, and a video such as this detailing criminal rappers is not going to help with that. But of course, not every rapper loves violence, not every rap song has vulgarity, and not every rapper is a criminal. Of course, rap has its bad eggs, probably more than most genres do, and there have been many of its artists that have found themselves trapped within a culture of violence and criminality, but at the same time, when you look around, there have been many other artists from many other genres that have done some very questionable or criminal things in the past, and so many people have found rap to be tarred with an unfair brush. Whether it be a racist thing because rap is often associated with black and Latino culture, or whether it be that the culture of rap itself is more dangerous than other music genres, I am by no means qualified to say. I simply can't weigh in here because I've never studied it. Most people watching this video are going to know way more about rap than I do. I'm an indie fan, I don't really care too much for the genre. But I am qualified to tell you that Schmidt was placed under house arrest because of this. He was barred from using the internet or uploading his songs to Soundcloud, he was barred from contacting members of his high school, he was fired from his job as a UPS package handler, and even had a female member of the school place a restraining order against him for terroristic threats and cyber harassment. Was this the culmination of years of intimidating and threatening behaviour by Schmidt, or was it all just an overreaction? Hysteria targeted towards a young man who wanted to do nothing else than creatively express himself through song. As far as I could find online, there was no update from Michael Schmidt after June of 2018, so I can't tell you the result of his trial, even if I doubt that he received the 5+ years that were possible. Unless the police found evidence of a planned attack, I can't think there's much of a case here. Now, talking about SoundCloud's criminals would be virtually impossible without mentioning the infamous Tay-K, a man not much older than me, with a rap sheet about as long as the script for this video. I already covered Tay-K's crimes before in a video that I made about banned Spotify artists, and to be honest, I don't really have too much more to say on the matter, nothing too much has changed. So instead of spending hours writing, recording, and editing the exact same stuff into this video, I thought it would make sense to edit that portion into this one, alongside more of a focus on his SoundCloud career. So if I'm hopping between this background and another one, don't be alarmed or anything, I'm not teleporting all over the place, that scene was just recorded a few months ago. So with that said, Tay-K emerged on the SoundCloud scene back in 2014 as part of a rap group named the Daytona Boys, alongside rappers Pimpies and Santana Sage. It's fair to say that the group never really gained too much traction, still to this day only having 4,000 followers, but in fairness, for Tay-K, who would have only been about 14 when this group was made, these were solid foundations. He would take things a step further in 2015 after he began releasing solo music, picking up a bit of traction in the local area, but this would be nothing compared to the success that he would find later on. Though the means of how he acquired that success are very disturbing to say the least, and they start with his criminal activities. Now, sources vary on the details, but the most common story that I've seen is that Tay-K, real name Tamor McIntyre, conspired with a 19 and 20-year-old named Megan Holt and Ariana Barrett respectively to rob a 19-year-old named Zachary Belowaite. The plan was that the girls were going to seduce the young man and then go back to his place, where they would leave the door unlocked, letting people into the house to rob it. However, when this came to happen, Belowaite was in the house at the time with his friend Ethan Walker. Tay-K, the apparent orchestrator, had recruited gunmen Lotharian Merritt and Sean Robinson, as well as others, to enact this drug and money theft. But things went horribly wrong after these hired men shot both Zachary and Ethan. Zachary was allegedly hit in the head with brass knuckles and shot in the shoulder, but would survive. Ethan, on the other hand, wasn't so lucky and was shot whilst his hands were in the air, his girlfriend testified. This, unfortunately, would prove fatal for Ethan. Tay-K was only 16 at the time of this shooting, but once the news broke, disturbingly, it massively helped his rap career. He was placed under house arrest, but in March 2017, he removed his ankle monitor and tweeted, "F*** this house arrest shit, they gonna have to catch me." He fled from Texas to New Jersey, but in June 2017 was recaptured and accused of beating and robbing a 65-year-old man and murdering a 23-year-old while on the run. He also made a music video for his song The Race in this time, and this leads us to 2018 when he was removed from Spotify's public playlists for a short time, but after the death of the hateful conduct policy a few weeks later, he's since been accepted back into the fold. But it probably doesn't matter too much anyway, because in July 2019, he was found guilty of murder for his part in the 2016 robbery. He was sentenced to 55 years in prison and is still awaiting trial for the charge against the 23-year-old victim he's said to have murdered whilst out on the run. So it's unlikely that the rapper will ever see the outside world again. The same thing could be said for Bryan Kohberger in the most disturbing story that we have today. For this next story, viewer discretion is advised because things are about to get very dark. If you don't recognise the name of Bryan Kohberger, you might recognise the crime that he's said to have committed. In November 2022, there were 4 university students in Idaho who were fatally stabbed, those being Madison Mogen, Kaylee Goncalves, Zana Konodal, and Ethan Chapin. The crime was blasted all over the news. It was absolutely devastating that it happened, and for the local community, it was terrifying. This was the first murder case in Moscow, Idaho for 7 years, and for a time, it seemed as if the assailant would get away with it, as it wasn't until the 30th of December, more than a month and a half since the crime took place, that a suspect would be placed into handcuffs, that being Bryan Kohberger. Even though this channel does deal with heavy and disturbing subject matter, I would by no means classify this as a true crime channel. The emotional weight and burden of having to discuss people who have been murdered or worse is simply too much for me to bear, especially when it comes to 4 university students who were around my age who had their entire lives ahead of them. I just can't do it. So for that reason, I'm not going to go into details about how the crime is thought to have played out, but I do want to take a look at Bryan Kohberger specifically because, as you might expect in a video titled SoundCloud's Criminal Rappers, this man actually uploaded content to SoundCloud, or at least it's thought. Reports of his SoundCloud career broke in January of this year after the New York Post uncovered a profile on the website believed to belong to the alleged murderer. He went under the username XR, and the song uncovered was named Rise Up Instrumental Test. This song includes some noteworthy lyrics such as, "You are not my equal, you are evil, but I'm devil," and "I'm a pacifist, like afraid to get a bloody fist." The reason that we believe Kohberger is XR is that the username is also a part of a personal email of his. This username seems to be quite unique, and so although not confirmed, it seems quite likely. But perhaps the most chilling thing of all of this is that his alleged rap is still out there on the internet. The XR account is still up on SoundCloud, and someone's even re-uploaded the song to YouTube. It's chilling to hear this music because we know that if he is in fact guilty, we're listening to a man who would go on to commit some of the worst acts a human could do. What happens next to Kohberger, whether he actually committed the crime that he's accused of, and whether he deserves to be featured in a video about SoundCloud's Criminal Rappers is yet to be seen as of June 2023. But this story is relatively unknown. I don't think I've seen anyone make a video about it yet, and so I thought I'd bring it to you. But if Bryan Kohberger is in fact guilty, that would surely make him be the most shameless criminal rapper that SoundCloud has ever seen. Anti-trans, anti-Jew, anti-black. These are all labels that a popular Minecraft streamer named Tubbo ascribed to users of the streaming platform Kick. Why? Well, another popular Minecraft streamer named Sapnap recently made a move over to the site. As a Minecraft streamer, it goes without saying that Sapnap is going to have a younger audience who Tubbo thought shouldn't be on the site. He seemed to have been of the approach that Sapnap was responsible for these younger audience members and therefore should have been wiser in decision making his points with some gusto.
I feel like this platform is not a safe place to be openly trans, not a safe place to be openly Jewish, not a safe place to be black, for example. It's insane. With such a large and powerful voice, it's best that you're more responsible with where you want to bring your community, and you have a responsibility to protect them as well.
Of course, when 2 big streamers disagree on any topic, other creators will be there covering the news and giving their thoughts on it, but at least in this instance, it seems as though public opinion was relatively divided. People saw it from different perspectives. On Team Tubbo, you'd have people who share his point of view. As we'll absolutely get into later, Kick is much less moderated than other areas of the internet. It seems almost like a site from 10 to 15 years ago rather than one today. In the modern landscape of the internet, sites often find themselves opting to moderate a lot of what goes on there because advertisers seem to prefer non-controversial content. Kick, however, have seen a gap in the market, as there are a lot of people who got fed up with its predecessor, Twitch, being too harsh on enforcing its rules, and therefore one of Kick's selling points is that it's a bit edgier. It allows in an audience that pulls less punches, and of course a byproduct of that is that you're going to get some people who go on there just to post a bunch of slurs, to say some horrible things, and face no consequences in doing so. The argument is, of course, by Sapnap moving over to Kick, he's upped the chances of his audience seeing this kind of stuff. There undoubtedly will be some people from Sapnap's audience who are young and would follow him to the ends of the earth, Kick included in there, and you have to ask, is this fair to them? Is it fair to potentially expose them to slurs and other hateful language? Well, maybe, and that sounds horrible to say, but hear me out, we're going to listen to both sides of this. A former Twitch streamer turned YouTube streamer called Ludwig spoke about the debate on his channel Mogul Mail, where he too questioned the move.
Kick.com right now, I think is a little too unmoderated and a little too associated with just hate speech outright. And so a creator like Sapnap going over will be an interesting test. We will see. All right, is he going to be hate rated by the people who are around him? Will the people who go to Sapnap's stream feel comfortable being on that stream?
Clearly Ludwig was apprehensive about the move, but these are the questions that were always going to be asked. This acquisition from Kick was really the first of its kind. It's the first time that a Minecraft streamer as large as Sapnap has gotten up, strolled across no man's land, and gone into the enemy trench. And time will only tell how it plays out. But there were some people who made the argument that Tubbo's response was stupid. Achito, a commentary creator, made the point that stuff like gender, sexuality, and religion is unlikely to come up during a livestream chat. He argued that Sapnap's audience very likely will not be targeted because they're trans or black or Jewish, because who's out there on a live stream race revealing in the chat?
But my first question is, how would you even be openly gay on Kick.com? Okay, if you're just in Sapnap's chat, are you literally typing out in chat, hey guys, this is me, I'm gay, I like penis. Like, why would you do that? You know what I mean?
Moreover, he made the point that it's not Sapnap's responsibility to look after his audience, because at the end of the day, it's the responsibility of the parents to make sure that their children are on age-appropriate sites.
You don't have to protect your fans. What is this parasocial mentality, dog? What is this? These people are not your parents. These people are influencers. They play Minecraft, okay? Your parents should be the ones looking after you, like seeing what websites you're going on.
Turkey Tom, on his second channel Tom Dark, argued that the entire response was overblown. He made the claim that Kick really isn't the monster that most people think it is, and that because Sapnap doesn't have a bigoted audience, it's not like he's going to adopt one overnight because he went over to a new platform.
Sapnap is someone who's a mainstream creator. He's not racist, he's not edgy in any way, he doesn't like any of that stuff, and yet here he is going to Kick because they offered him some money. If anything, him going there will make that platform less racist, less bigoted, and less edgy.
Tom's audience seemed to agree with him, with one person comparing Minecraft Twitter's reaction to the entire incident to Sapnap violating the Geneva Convention. So you have to ask, for Sapnap, why risk it? Does he want to be a good ambassador for Kick like he says? Does he want to be the one to bring positive change to the platform? Or does he want a bit of change himself? Let's not kid ourselves here, I have to assume that this decision was mostly financial, as over the past couple of months, Kick has been scooping up unhappy streamers, paying them multi-million-dollar contracts to come over and stream. I don't know the guy, but based upon the fact that people often question if he actually cares for the audience that he's cultivated, or for being a positive role model, it could definitely be that he saw the check, closed his eyes, and signed on the dotted line. If I'm being frank here, to be a Minecraft creator is to be an entertainer to an audience mostly comprised of children and teenagers. Of course there are older audience members who can watch and enjoy this content too, but a large portion of Sapnap's audience is a younger demographic. Maybe this move was simply a way of him distancing himself from them now that he's a bit bigger and is no longer as dependent on them anymore. His announcement video might be seen as a clue, as he's watching Cocomelon before destroying his name. Maybe this is me going all game theory on him, but this could be him trying to tell us that he's done with that kind of stuff. As I've already mentioned, Kick has been paying exorbitant amounts of money recently, and over the past year has consistently been poaching talent away from Twitch. But how did we get to where we are now? Well, that's exactly what we're about to get into in a moment, because in this video, we're taking a look at some of the largest controversies that Kick has seen in its short life. From sex scandals to problematic personalities, it seems like the site is making headlines every day. To give you some background, Kick was founded in late 2022 as a competitor to Twitch, perhaps the largest live streaming site on the web. For years now, creators have been complaining about the service. As I covered in my Twitch episode in my Book of the Banned series, they terminate a lot of accounts, and they tend to be quite inconsistent in who they go for and why, and this has led to a lot of resentment. Additionally, in autumn 2022, gambling was culled from the site in a move spearheaded by one of the largest streamers, Pokimane. Unlicensed gambling sites, many of which were extremely popular, were banned. We're talking the likes such as Roulette.com, Duelbits.com, and of course, Stake.com. These sites apparently didn't provide enough customer protection, and Twitch deemed them to be potentially harmful. Keep in mind that contrary to popular belief, this didn't entirely kill off gambling on Twitch. Some forms of gambling were still allowed, but in less than a year since the banning of these unlicensed sites, Twitch has reported that viewership of gambling content is down by 75%. This new change in policy angered a lot of viewers and streamers alike. Knowing what we know now, this could have been a grave mistake for the sites. Though perhaps Kick's greatest advantage was the gargantuan blunder that Twitch made when they announced they were changing their 70-30 revenue split for premium streamers. Essentially, streamers that were large enough, ones that brought viewers over to the site, were able to get a deal from Twitch in which they kept 70% of the revenue earned through subscriptions, but Twitch announced that it was going to change this so that all of their deals with streamers went down to a 50-50 split. Every large streamer had to ask themselves, why should I stay here on Twitch if my revenue's being cut from 70-30 to 50-50? Keep this in mind too, if you're unaware, Twitch is owned by Amazon. You know, one of the most profitable companies in the world. It's not like it's a fledgling little startup. I have to assume that this was purely a move for greed, and it cost Twitch dearly. They had already been losing talent to YouTube over the past year or two, with the likes of Valkyrae, Sykkuno and Ludwig signing exclusive deals to come over. But in late 2022, things would go from bad to worse when Bijan Tirani and Ed Craven, the founders of Stake.com, as well as streamer Trainwrecks TV, better known as Train, would found Kick. Their company would offer creators a 95-5 split for subscriptions, so 95% of revenue earned would go to the creator. By March of this year, big names such as Aiden Ross and chess grandmaster Hikaru Nakamura would join the site. Then in June, XQC was given a contract worth $70 million to stream on Kick for 2 years. Then 2 days later, the site signed Amaranth for an undisclosed amount, but based off XQC's contract, we could assume that this deal was worth potentially tens of millions. Of course, other creators who had been permanently banned by Twitch made the move over too, and so here we are today. Twitch is losing creators fast. YouTube and Kick are poaching them all one by one, and not everyone is too happy about it. Back in July this year during a live stream, Pokimane came out with some choice words against Kick. She was asked by a viewer if she would change her colours from purple to green and sign with Kick if offered $10 million, and she argued against it. She said that she's already got a lot of money, so it really wouldn't make sense to compromise her morals to sign on the dotted line.
Nope. No, and it's not because I got like $10 million, it's just because I'm good as I am. Why would I compromise my morals and ethics for more money when I have money? Something about that is so cringe to me personally. Like, I understand, you know, if you need to make money. Can someone put this into words better than I can? It's almost embarrassing.
Now, Pokimane has some trouble articulating her point here. It's quite difficult to say that you're an insanely rich multi-millionaire without sounding boastful, but that's essentially what she was saying. In her mind, Kick is morally grey. It's perhaps just a bit unethical. Though she doesn't expressly say it, it's possible that she agrees with a lot of what Tubbo had to say, mainly that being that Kick isn't moderated enough, and that it fosters an offensive or even problematic user base. But as you might expect, there were many people who criticised Pokimane because of her viewpoints. As we mentioned earlier, there are creators out there who have argued that Kick's user base really isn't as bad as many people would have you believe. XQC said that he genuinely didn't understand the morals and ethics argument, and even Kick itself responded to the drama with a TikTok that poked fun at the streamer.
What
are you doing?
Nothing. Me? They is hanging around.
This clip is clearly implying that it's really not her business where a streamer decides to go. Something else has to be said of Pokimane's position though, and it's a point I'm not sure has been explored very much or expanded upon, but you could definitely make the argument that Pokimane inadvertently led to the rise of Kick, even if it was just in part. As I mentioned earlier, Pokimane was one of the largest critics of gambling content on Twitch, and as I discussed in my Scammers Iceberg last December, gambling content had become incredibly popular on Twitch prior to its erasure. Towards the end of its life, gambling was in the top 10 categories on the platform, increasing in popularity by 66% compared to the year prior, and then Slicker had to go and scam everyone, and well, you know, it wasn't too long until the category was catapulted into non-existence. Pokimane was one of the largest advocates for Twitch to do something about the category, and within days, gambling restrictions were put in place. Was Pokimane wrong for doing this? We'll get into that in a moment, but one of her main arguments was that gambling was supposedly being promoted to young audiences. Was this true? Again, we'll get into that in a moment, but for now, let me tell you that almost 75% of Twitch's audience is apparently under 35 years old. But since no report I found was able to give a reliable estimation on their under 18 audience, it's kind of tough to gauge just how many under 18s watch. Still though, you have to assume that it's a fair percentage. So the question has to be asked, does Pokimane have a leg to stand on? Is access to gambling content for young people really that unethical? Well, to find out, I guess we're going to have to take a look at it. Obviously, this portion of the video is going to be difficult to do because there are just so many different forms of gambling and even more types of gamblers. So I'm going to try and focus on just the impact of these sorts of streams and under 18's responses to gambling in general. So on the one hand, you have the argument that this was a gateway to gambling for the youth. Twitch doesn't have age verifications put in place. If you want to watch a gambling stream, all you have to do is click on a button saying that you're okay with it. This means that young people can hypothetically easily access this sort of content, and studies have shown that they don't exactly fully understand it. The UK Gambling Commission found that around 3 in 10 of 11 to 16-year-olds were actively involved in gambling in the past 12 months. And these numbers can be broken down even further, as this study found that 27.3% of children this age are non-problem gamblers, 2.4% are at risk, and roughly 1% of 11 to 16-year-olds are classed as problem gamblers. Compare this to the adult population, where according to the UK government, 3.8% of gamblers are at risk and 0.5% have a problem, and you can see that it's not that far off. Now, you might be thinking that 0.5% is fairly low, and in some instances, of course it is, but when you look at the United Kingdom's population of 67 million, 0.5% of that is more than 300,000. If we're relating these numbers back to live streams, the same study found that 36% of its participants, so more than 1 in 3, were exposed to gambling content via live streaming. This number can be broken down into 44% of the boys asked and 28% of the girls. How many of those do you think were through Twitch? Of these people who said that they saw gambling content via live streams, 47% said that they were exposed to gambling at least once a week. In fact, live streams were the most common place for these children to be exposed to gambling advertisements on a regular basis, beating out the likes of other social media and television ads. So it seems as though Pokimane and the other anti-gamblers were in a way correct. Under 18s, just like adults, do consume gambling content, and they do form unhealthy relationships with gambling, and therefore, you could definitely make the argument that gambling on Twitch should be restricted. At the same time though, of course there were arguments against this. Just as we said before, many people would say that it should be the parents' responsibility to make sure that their children consume appropriate content, not streaming sites. And if we're looking at Kick specifically, something that's come up a lot in this video is that it's not appropriate for younger audiences. In this case, good. If under 18s actively seek out gambling content online, there's no stopping them. But because the general consensus is that Kick.com is a bit edgier and not as safe for young audiences, if a 15-year-old or a 16-year-old is on Kick, watching someone play slots, you might make the argument that those are their choices, and if they then go and gamble, those are their consequences. If you look at Kick's gambling live streams, they all say 18+. As we know, there's an audience for it, so if Twitch isn't going to take it, Kick will. So what do you guys think? Let me know respectfully down in the comments below as I move on to yet another area of Kick that people have had a problem with, that being the violations of their sex and nudity policy. So we've touched on hate speech and gambling content so far in this video, and I wanted to discuss yet another aspect of Kick content, one that I don't think has been spoken about so much, that being the overt sexual content that is on the site already. Now, sexual content and live streaming go together like apple and pie. The past few years have seen e-girls especially make some serious bank by engaging in sexually suggestive content over Twitch. I've discussed this topic at length in both my video on e-girls and banned Twitch users, but essentially, Twitch has been quite inconsistent in what they do and don't allow on the site. As I discussed in these videos, you've had creators like Amaranth who did similar things to IndieFox, but IndieFox's Twitch account was terminated for 2 years, whereas Amaranth was allowed to carry on. And as I mentioned earlier in this video, Amaranth, one of the largest Twitch streamers, has now signed on with Kick. And purely based on the rules that were announced on Kick's Discord, it seems as though Kick on paper have similar policies when it comes to sex and nudity to Twitch. So when a Kick streamer called Suspendus immediately had sex whilst live back in December 2022, it caused a bit of a stir. According to a Sportskeeda article, Suspendus, an IRL streamer, appeared to be fully naked while live. And according to online gaming reporter Jake Lucky, he apparently had engaged in sexual intercourse with a hooker. Worse yet, if this was in fact true, he was able to evade any and all consequences. Suspendus is still on Kick to this very day, despite being embroiled in yet another sex scandal only a few months later. In early April 2023, he allegedly was having sex whilst there was a minor in close proximity. I can't verify for certainty if this is true or not. My source for this story is Eleni Thomas, who wrote about it in an article for Dexerto. Her source links a Reddit page in which people went off on Suspendus, but as I said before, and please pardon the pun, he's still around and kicking. Of course, this isn't even where Kick's sex scandals stopped either. If we take things back to February this year, news stories started dropping about another Kick streamer, this one called Heel Mike. If you look him up, you'll see all sorts of articles written about him. Heel Mike is quite the controversial figure, but back in late February this year, it was announced that Heel Mike was actually banned from Kick for streaming himself receiving head. That's right, he slopped his way to the top, generating 25,000 viewers who all tuned in to see his knob get gobbled. But this would not go down well, as obviously this is against Kick's rules. His punishment? A 1-day suspension. He tweeted out his support for Kick, saying that it's the GOAT or the greatest of all time because it tells creators where they went wrong. I guess he must have missed the memo about receiving head on stream, but nonetheless, that was the last sex scandal that Kick ever had. For about 24 hours. Because it was during this time that another Kick streamer, Aiden Ross, was still dealing with the fallout of his own controversy. Aiden Ross might have called hot tub streams poison in the past in a rant that he's since apologised for, but this hasn't stopped him from showing straight up nudity on his stream on more than one occasion. The first instance was back in February. As I said, it was at the same time that Heel Mike had his scandal, and the dude literally whipped up the hub whilst his chat went wild. In this instance, Ross was able to avoid getting a ban, going on later to brag about it. A few months later, in August 2023, he was streaming himself on a website called monkey.app, which operates in a similar fashion to Omegle, and you can start to see where this is going. He violated Kick's nudity policy again in this stream, but as was the same case in February, he was once again able to avoid any repercussions. Clearly, Kick is playing favourites here, which is what annoyed a lot of people about Twitch. It's easy to understand why some fans might get annoyed if their favourite streamer was banned for something that Aiden Ross was given a pass for. And for that reason, time will only tell if history once again repeats itself. But of course, Aiden Ross has done a lot more than just show nudity on his streams to generate controversy. He's one of the figureheads of Kick, but also one of its most contentious streamers. It's time to talk about Ross himself and why his mere existence is a source of controversy for the site. You probably know Mr. Ross by now, but just in case you don't, the 22-year-old is currently one of the most controversial figures on the internet. Why? Well, for starters, many people have called him both homophobic and transphobic. In terms of his homophobic controversies, there have been instances of Ross allegedly using homophobic slurs.
Yeah, I don't know. He did you again? He got you again?
Yes, bro. Like, this kid's a
No! Yo!
He then apparently tried to gaslight people into thinking that he said Alan, but very few people were buying it. In response, Ross was banned from Twitch, and so he took to Kick, allegedly not knowing why he was banned. As for his attacks on the trans community, Ross has made it clear that he doesn't seem to believe in any other gender identity other than male and female. He seems to believe that people that use they-them pronouns are just looking for attention, and in what's been described as a transphobic rant from March of this year, he even went as far as to say that his pronouns were kill/them.
To all you guys that get to pick your pronouns, my pronouns is kill/them, okay? Fuck all y'all, bro. Y'all are making the world a shitty place, bro. I'm gonna call you either a guy or a girl.
Of course, this led a lot of people who didn't take too kindly to the LGBT community to flock over to Ross, who apparently had his Kick chat live on Twitch for roughly 20 minutes, and these people spewed very insensitive messages. As I've mentioned before, Kick has very little moderation compared to Twitch, and so the things that people were saying on Kick were unhinged to say the least. Very unhinged, in fact. So unhinged that, according to Dixerto, this was potentially the reason that he got permanently banned from Twitch in February. A Twitch spokesperson told Dixerto that Aiden Ross was banned after showing unmoderated, hateful conduct in chat. Per our community guidelines, unmoderated, hateful conduct in chat, such as racist and anti-Semitic messages, is not allowed on Twitch. Ross had made the move to Kick just days before, but in the fallout of these events, he now had to go full-time. If you take a look at his former Twitch account today, you'll see that it's still gone, likely never to come back. So Ross officially moves over to Kick, and ever since he's been one of the stars of the site. But with a figure as controversial as Aiden Ross, you have to wonder, is this a good thing for the service? Let's be honest, Ross is not exactly squeaky clean. Streamers such as Pokimane and Tubbo probably have someone like Ross in mind when they speak to their audience about the morals and the ethics of Kick. Ross's audience have been known to spam some hateful, racist and bigoted messages in the chat. They've been known to trick the dude into seeing his sister naked on more than one occasion. You have to ask yourself, is this the kind of guy that you want representing your brand? Kick's CEO Eddie Craven admitted that Ross had been an asset in areas. After all, he had helped the platform grow in its infancy, but he'd be lying if he said that Ross wasn't a brand risk. Ross was one of the first big streamers across to Kick. He set the standard. But will him being such an important icon for the site turn out to be more of a poison chalice? I guess we'll have to wait and find out. So there we have it. If you're still watching this video 3.5 hours later, mad props to you, thank you so much for watching it all. And if you want to watch another compilation of mine and you have another 3.5 hours spare, obviously I've done my banned content compilation a couple of months ago. It's now my 6th most popular video. Soon it's going to be my 4th, and I think that really speaks volume to the quality of my book of the banned series. So go check that one out if you haven't seen it already. Also, if you've made it to this part of the video and you're still not subscribed, how is that possible? Please hit that big red button, subscribe, truly, I would appreciate it. Aside from that, I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you later.